Hey there, tonight we're diving into the bustling, chaotic world of a Bronze Age city, where the truth is, your senses would be overwhelmed by the unrelenting noise and a rich tapestry of smells that aren't always pleasant. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. The sun isn't just a ball of gas burning millions of miles away. Today, it's your alarm clock, and it's pretty relentless. Forget about hitting snooze. You're in a Bronze Age city, and that fiery orb is already blazing through the open window, casting a warm glow over the rough-hewn walls of your abode. No curtains to block it out, no apps to delay the inevitable rise and grind. And speaking of grinding, the sound of quern stones turning grain into flour is your morning soundtrack, with a side of bleating goats and clucking chickens. Welcome to the dawn of civilization, where the only thing more crowded than the morning sky is the bustling market you'll soon be navigating. Your first lesson in ancient urban living: mornings start early. By 5:00 a.m., the city is already a hive of activity. People have been up since before the sun, stoking fires and tending to livestock. If you're lucky, your dwelling, likely a modest affair made of mud brick and thatch, is strategically located near the central market, which means you're in the thick of it from the get-go. The smoke from countless hearths fills the air, mingling with the aroma of baking bread and the earthy scent of damp earth. It's a sensory overload, but there's no time to linger. The market awaits. Now, before you conjure up images of a quaint farmer's market with artisanal goods and organic produce, let's get real. This is the Bronze Age, roughly 3,300 to 1,200 BCE, depending on where you are in the world. And the market isn't just where you pick up groceries. It's the economic heart of the city. Forget credit cards, or even coins for that matter. The economy is a barter system, so be prepared to haggle over a bushel of grain or a slab of meat. Value is determined by necessity and scarcity, not some shiny bit of metal. By the time you reach the market, it's a cacophony of voices. Traders from nearby villages have arrived with carts laden with goods, everything from barley and emmer wheat to copper tools and woolen textiles. As you move through the crowd, you notice the social hierarchies playing out in real time. Elite merchants, often distinguished by their finer clothing and more elaborate jewelry, command respect and better deals. Meanwhile, farmers and lesser traders, easily identified by their simpler attire, stand by their stalls, hoping to catch the eye of a passing buyer. This isn't just a shopping trip, it's an exercise in survival. You need to trade wisely if you hope to eat later, but there's more than just food here. The Bronze Age is named for its defining technological advancement. After all, bronze tools, made by alloying copper with tin, are the cutting edge, literally and figuratively. You might see a trader hawking bronze sickles or axes, and believe me, they're worth their weight in, well, bronze. It's the tech boom of its time, and having the right tools can make the difference between thriving and merely surviving. While you haggle, it's worth reflecting on the social dynamics at play. In this city, power isn't just about who has the most goods. It's about who controls the trade routes and has access to resources. The merchant class and political elites often overlap, with the latter leveraging control over trade to maintain power. This is the dawn of economic inequality, folks, and it's as real as the dirt under your sandals. Before you know it, it's mid-morning, and the sun is officially at full throttle. You've managed to secure some grain and a few vegetables, maybe even a piece of dried meat if you're lucky. The weight of it all hangs in the woven basket slung over your shoulder. As you make your way back through the throngs of people, you might catch snippets of conversation. News travels fast in a world without newspapers or social media. Someone's ox has fallen ill. A neighboring village is rumored to have had a poor harvest. The city ruler is planning a festival. Information is power, and gossip is the Bronze Age equivalent of a newsfeed. As you weave through the market, you can't help but notice the distinct lack of personal space. Crowds jostle you from side to side, and the concept of a personal bubble is as foreign as an iPhone. It's all part of the charm or chaos, depending on your perspective. But let's face it, There's no room for introverts here. You're part of a sprawling community, and anonymity isn't an option. That's the price of civilization, my friend. By the time you return to your dwelling, the day is well underway, and you've already lived a lifetime in the market. The sun continues its relentless march across the sky, marking the passage of time in this world without clocks. As you set down your basket and catch your breath, you're reminded that you're just a small player in a much larger story. A story of trade, power, and survival that's been unfolding for millennia. Welcome to the Bronze Age, where every morning is a fresh start, but also a reminder of the grind that never really ends. And just like that, the basket's down, your shoulders ache, and you're contemplating the next phase of your Bronze Age marathon, work. The concept of clocking in might be a few thousand years off, but trust me, the grind waits for no one. You're about to dive headfirst into the world of Bronze Age labor, where sweat is the currency and exhaustion comes free with every task. So what's on the docket today? Perhaps you're an artisan, one of the lucky ones, if you can call it that. Artisans are the rock stars of their era, except the only crowds cheering are the other townsfolk hoping they can afford your wares. You're crafting tools, jewelry, or maybe even weapons. It's all about bronze, baby, a miraculous metal that defined an age. But it's not all glamour and glitz. Forging bronze is nothing short of alchemy, and it demands skill, patience, and a dash of insanity. Bronze, that magical alloy of copper and tin, wasn't just lying around waiting to be picked up. Copper had to be mined, often in sweltering conditions, and tin was even rarer, sourced from places as distant as modern-day Afghanistan. Yup, you heard right. The original supply chain nightmare. Those trade routes sprawled across hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles. Picture caravans of pack animals plodding along, each laden with raw materials worth more than a few fortunes. And you think your Amazon delivery's slow. Try waiting months for your tin shipment to arrive. The staggering cost of these materials meant that a simple bronze tool was a luxury item. Forget about buying in bulk. Every ingot was precious. If you wanted a new axe or plowshare, you'd better be ready to barter the equivalent of a small farm. This scarcity turned bronze into a status symbol, the ancient world's answer to designer handbags or the latest tech gadget. If you had bronze, you had power. That's why these tools didn't just shape metal, they shaped society. Let's not romanticize this too much, though. The life of an artisan was demanding, physically and mentally. You're working by the heat of a roaring furnace, shaping metal with rudimentary tools, all while praying that you don't botch that crucial sword order for the local chieftain. Because in a world where might often makes right, you really don't want to disappoint the guy with the biggest army. And speaking of armies, the military implications of bronze were immense. Those who controlled the supply lines controlled the power dynamics, and entire empires rose and fell on the strength of their bronze caches. In a way, bronze was the original arms race. Cities fortified with bronze weapons had a significant edge, and you can bet that every ruler worth his salt was angling to get his hands on the finest swords and shields. But let's not forget the unsung heroes of this saga. The traders and merchants who risked life and limb to transport these precious goods across treacherous terrains. They navigated rivers, crossed deserts, and dodged bandits, all in the name of commerce. And here's the kicker. These guys weren't just moving metals. They were spreading ideas, technologies, even languages. Trade routes were the internet of the ancient world, wiring distant cultures together in a complex web of exchange. So, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, you're knee-deep in the laborious realities of Bronze Age life. Whether you're sweating it out as a craftsman, strategizing as a merchant, or flexing your political savvy as a city leader, one thing's for certain. Life in this era is anything but simple. The stakes are high, the work is grueling, and the rewards are as elusive as they are tantalizing. And there you have it, a glimpse into the relentless hustle that defined a civilization. The Bronze Age was a time of innovation, yes, but also of intense labor and staggering inequality. As you wipe the sweat from your brow, remember that each piece of bronze you forge or trade doesn't just tell a story of craftsmanship. It tells a story of human ambition, of a world ever reaching for the next horizon. As the day rolls on, you're left pondering the intricate dance of trade and labor, of power and survival. The threads of this complex tapestry are woven with the sweat and toil of countless individuals, each playing their part in an endless cycle of creation and destruction. But don't get too comfortable. There's more to uncover in this age of metal and might. The sun may be high, but the day is far from over. Keep your eyes open and your wits about you. After all, the Bronze Age waits for no one. As you wipe the sweat from your brow, it hits you. The Bronze Age is a relentless marathon of toil, but even the hardest workers have to eat. Enter lunchtime, though don't get too cozy, because here it's more of a survival tactic than a leisurely escape. Forget your visions of sprawling buffets and Instagrammable brunches. In this era, the menu would make even the most adventurous foodie squirm. Let's start with the star of the Bronze Age food pyramid, bread, and not the fluffy, artisanal kind you'd find at a modern bakery. Nope, we're talking about gritty, tooth-chipping slabs made from emmer wheat or barley. These grains were the staple of your diet, ground painstakingly by hand using quern stones. Imagine munching on a slice of bread so textured you'd swear you're exfoliating your gums, and you'd better be careful. Archaeologists have found that the grit from stone-ground flour often wore down teeth prematurely, which could lead to infections. Ouch. But hey, at least you've got some protein right. If you're lucky. Meat isn't exactly a daily indulgence for the average city dweller. Chickens and goats are more valuable alive for their eggs and milk than they are on your plate. A chunk of dried meat might make an appearance, but it's more of a cameo than a starring role. You're likely to see lentils, beans, and maybe a few vegetables gathered from your morning market run, cautiously mixed into a stew. It's the original farm-to-table movement, minus the Michelin stars. And let's not forget the beverages. Water is, well, not always the safest option. Enter the fermented drinks. Beer and a primitive form of wine were the beverages of choice, not just for their buzz, but because fermentation kills off harmful bacteria. That's right. Your afternoon pint isn't just for pleasure, it's a public health measure. It's like the ancient version of filter coffee, just with more potential to knock you on your backside. Now, you might be imagining these meals happening in the quiet corner of a home, but think again. Meals were often communal, a chance to gather and share news, gossip, or rumors. Food was a social glue, binding families and communities together, with each bite a testament to the collective effort of agriculture, trade, and even religious belief. Because here's the twist. Eating was as much a spiritual affair as it was sustenance. Religion and ritual were woven into the very fabric of mealtime. The gods and goddesses of the Bronze Age were as hungry for offerings as you were for lunch. Sacrifices were made, from the first fruits of the harvest to the occasional animal. These rituals were a way to curry favor with the divine, ensuring good weather, bountiful crops, and the overall well-being of the community. Picture it, a priest presiding over the meal, invoking blessings as smoke from a sacrificial altar mingles with the aroma of your stew. It's like a spiritual seasoning, adding layers of meaning to every bite. This isn't just about appeasement, though. Religious rituals were practical, too. They marked the passage of time, divided the year into seasons, and dictated when certain foods were harvested. The agricultural calendar was a sacred text, its rhythms as predictable as the sunrise. Spring meant planting, summer saw the crops grow, autumn brought the harvest, and winter was a time to conserve and prepare. Every meal was a reminder of this cycle, a nod to the forces beyond human control. And while we're on the subject of control, let's talk about the agricultural practices that kept your table from being perpetually empty. Farming in the Bronze Age was no walk in the park. Forget tractors and fertilizers. This was back-breaking work, with wooden plows pulled by oxen and fields seeded by hand. Crop rotation was crucial. Planting the same crop repeatedly would deplete the soil, a mistake you couldn't afford when your survival depended on every grain harvested. When the harvest came in, it was a communal effort, a time of celebration and relief. Grain was stored in large granaries, often controlled by the ruling elite or religious leaders. This concentration of resources meant food could be distributed during lean years, but it also made those who controlled the granaries incredibly powerful. You could say the original gatekeepers of food security were also the architects of social stratification. So, as you sit there nibbling on your gritty bread and sipping your safety beer, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of this Bronze Age banquet. Every bite is a microcosm of the world you inhabit, a world where survival is a constant dance with nature, the divine, and your fellow humans. It's a reminder that food isn't just about nutrition, it's about culture, community, and control. And just like that, Your lunch break is over. Time to get back to the grind, whether that's in the fields, at the forge, or haggling in the marketplace. The sun continues its journey across the sky, unrelenting as ever, and the hustle of the Bronze Age resumes with the same fervor that sustained humanity for millennia. You've got a long afternoon ahead, and in this world, there's no rest for the ambitious. Keep your wits sharp, your tools sharper, and remember, in the Bronze Age, every moment is an opportunity to carve out your place in a world that's as relentless as it is fascinating. The sun shows no mercy as it climbs higher, and so do the odors that define city life in the Bronze Age. Forget the romanticized scent of ancient temples and spices wafting through the air. What you're really smelling is the heady cocktail of sweat, livestock, and waste, all simmering under the relentless sun. Ah, the sweet aroma of civilization, or at least the lack of modern sanitation. Welcome to urban planning, Bronze Age style, where the only thing more muddled than the city layout is the political landscape keeping it all together. Step out of your midday haze and take a closer look. Cities like Uruk or Mycenae didn't have the luxury of modern sewer systems. Waste disposal was a daily battle, often fought with a combination of open drains and sheer hope. Streets were narrow, winding labyrinths, designed more by accident than any architectural genius. If you tripped on a cobblestone, you'd likely end up with a face full of whatever the neighbor's goat left behind. Yet somehow, this chaos functioned, and it was a testament to the ingenuity, or desperation, of its inhabitants. Public works were a patchwork of necessity and innovation. Take the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, for instance. Built around 2500 BCE, this ancient marvel was a communal bathing facility, a rare glimpse of urban planning sophistication in a world where most cities were still figuring out how to manage their trash. It was a testament to the Indus Valley civilization's commitment to hygiene and social order, something other cities could only dream of. But let's not get too carried away with admiration. For every great bath, there were countless cities struggling to keep up with the demands of their growing populations. Absence of centralized sanitation systems meant that disease was a constant threat. Malaria, dysentery, and other delightful maladies lurked in the shadows, ready to strike the unsuspecting city dweller. It's no wonder that life expectancy was a dicey affair, often not stretching much beyond 35 years. In this world, survival wasn't just about having the right tools or making the right trades. It was about dodging the invisible enemies breeding in the muck beneath your feet. Now, as you navigate these crowded streets, you might think the biggest challenge is keeping your sandals clean. But hold on, there's more. The real drama unfolds in the form of political machinations that could give even the shadiest modern politician a run for their money. Bronze Age politics was a high-stakes game, where alliances were as fragile as a clay pot, and disputes had the potential to escalate into city-wide chaos. Take, for instance, the city-states of Sumer. Each city was essentially a sovereign entity, ruled by a king or a priest-king who wielded both secular and religious power. The political scene was a complex web of negotiations, betrayals, and power plays. A simple land dispute or an unpaid debt could quickly spiral into a full-blown conflict. Imagine Game of Thrones, but with more mud and fewer dragons. And don't even get me started on the legal systems, or lack thereof. In the Bronze Age, justice was swift, often brutal, and occasionally bewildering. Hammurabi's code, dating back to around 1754 BCE, is one of the earliest known sets of written laws. With 282 laws inscribed on a 7-foot stone stele, it laid out punishments that ranged from fines to, well, more severe consequences. An eye for an eye wasn't just a metaphor. It was the literal law of the land. Break someone's tooth, better have a dental plan, because yours might be next. But let's be real. Hammurabi's code was more the exception than the rule. Most cities didn't have such a formalized legal system. Instead, justice was often meted out by local rulers or councils, with decisions influenced as much by personal vendettas as by any sense of fairness. It was a world where who you knew mattered as much as what you did, and resolving disputes often required a delicate dance of diplomacy and threat. Speaking of diplomacy, let's talk about those who navigated these murky waters without losing their heads, literally. Scribes and bureaucrats were the unsung heroes of the Bronze Age, the original paper pushers, only, with clay tablets. These guys were the keepers of records, the organizers of trade, and the mediators of disputes. They were the glue that held the city together, even if their contributions often went unnoticed by the common folk. But let's not romanticize their lives too much. Becoming a scribe required years of training, and it wasn't exactly the fast track to wealth and fame. These diligent workers were more akin to modern-day civil servants, essential but often underappreciated. Still, if you had to choose a profession in this turbulent world, scribe was definitely a safer bet than, say, soldier or merchant. As the afternoon heat reaches its peak, you might find yourself longing for the shade of a palm tree or the cool embrace of a mud-brick home. But there's no rest for the weary, not when there are disputes to be settled, trade deals to be struck, and alliances to be forged. The city is a living organism, and every citizen is a cog in its vast, clunky machine. So, as you wipe the grime from your brow and navigate the bustling streets, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of this world. It's a place where survival requires more than just strength or skill. It demands cunning, diplomacy, and a fair amount of luck. The sun may be merciless, but it also sheds light on the intricate dance of power, politics, and survival that defines life in a Bronze Age city. And remember, the day is far from over. The city waits for no one, and there's still much more to uncover before the sun finally dips below the horizon. As the sun finally begins its lazy descent, casting long shadows over the clay rooftops and bustling streets, the city shifts gears. The day's grind gives way to the evening's rhythm, and you can almost feel the collective sigh of relief as the temperature drops a few precious degrees. But don't get too comfortable. This Bronze Age city doesn't slip into slumber when the sun goes down. Instead, the evening kicks off with communal gatherings that are as much about social survival as they are about relaxation. Picture this, an open courtyard, the heart of the city, where families and neighbors congregate. It's a scene that defies the modern notion of a quiet night in. Here, privacy is as rare as a tin deposit, and the communal vibe is less about choice and more about necessity. After all, when you're living in cramped quarters, the courtyard is your living room, kitchen, and social network rolled into one. Now, these gatherings aren't just about exchanging the latest gossip. Though let's be real, gossip is the original social media. They're also about storytelling, a vital thread in the cultural tapestry. In a world where literacy is a luxury and written records are scarce, oral tradition is the backbone of history. This is where myths are born and legends are nurtured. The storyteller, often an elder, weaves tales of gods and heroes, battles and betrayals. It's entertainment, sure, but it's also education, preserving history in a form that's sticky enough to survive generations. And speaking of myths, let's bust a few bubbles. The stories you're hearing aren't just tall tales invented to keep children entertained. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, one of the oldest known works of literature, dating back to around 2100 BCE. It's an epic saga of friendship, adventure, and existential musings that would make even a modern philosopher nod in agreement. But while the story is grand, the reality it reflects is grittier. Gilgamesh, the titular hero, is likely based on a real king of Uruk, a city that was as much about political intrigue and power struggles as it was about mighty quests. But why do these stories endure? It's because they do more than entertain. They articulate the hopes, fears, and values of their time. They offer a mirror to the human condition, reflecting both the noble and the ignoble in equal measure. They're a reminder that while technology and customs evolve, the core of humanity doesn't change all that much. We're still telling stories, still seeking meaning, still grappling with the same existential dilemmas, albeit with fewer clay tablets and more screen time. As the evening progresses, the focus shifts to the night sky, a canopy of stars that Bronze Age dwellers knew like the back of their calloused hands. Without the light pollution that plagues modern cities, the night sky is a breathtaking map, both a guide and a mystery. It's the original GPS, used for navigation in a world without compasses or Google Maps. Farmers watched the stars to determine planting seasons, while sailors relied on constellations to steer their rudimentary vessels through uncharted waters. Yet, for all its guidance, the night sky is also a harbinger of mystery. To the Bronze Age mind, the heavens aren't just a scientific phenomenon. They are the realm of the gods, a celestial stage where divine dramas unfold. Eclipses are omens, comets are messengers, and each twinkling star might just be a deity keeping watch. It's a worldview that blends observation with imagination, science with myth, in a way that's both enchanting and grounding. And while we're on the subject of myths and legends, let's talk about the ones that have survived to this day. The story of Troy, for example, immortalized by Homer's Iliad, is a tantalizing mix of fact and fiction. For years, people debated whether Troy was a real city or just a figment of poetic imagination. That is until Heinrich Schliemann, the 19th century archaeologist, stumbled upon its ruins in what is now Turkey. Turns out, the city was real, even if the wooden horse was likely a creative embellishment. But here's the kicker. The reality of Bronze Age life was both harsher and more fascinating than any romanticized tale. It was a time when survival was a daily battle, where the line between life and death was as thin as a reed mat. Disease, famine, and warfare weren't just plot devices, they were ever-present threats. Yet, amid the struggle, there was innovation, creativity, and an indomitable spirit that drove people to build, explore, and dream. As the night deepens and the city finally starts to quiet down, you might find yourself contemplating the legacy of this era. The Bronze Age was more than just a historical footnote. It was a crucible of human development. It laid the groundwork for future civilizations, its innovations and ideas echoing through time. The tools, trade routes, and tales forged in this era became the foundation upon which later societies built their own towers of ambition. So, as you drift off to sleep under the same stars that guided your ancient counterparts, remember this. History isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a story of human resilience, a testament to our capacity for both creation and destruction, for storytelling and survival. The Bronze Age may be long gone, but its spirit lives on in every challenge we face and every story we tell. And isn't that the real magic of history? It's not just about what happened. It's about how it continues to shape who we are today. Alexander Hamilton entered this world under less than glamorous circumstances that wouldn't exactly scream future founding father. Born on January 11, 1755, or maybe 1757, because even his birth year is up for debate, in the Caribbean island of Nevis. He was the product of a scandalous union between James Hamilton, a Scottish trader, and Rachel Fawcett, a woman whose marital status at the time was complicated. Let's just say that Rachel's previous husband wasn't exactly thrilled about her new family dynamics. So, Alexander started life with a bit of a social handicap, the son of a woman who had a reputation, and a father who would eventually abandon the family. Not the kind of pedigree you'd expect for someone destined to have his face on the $10 bill, right? Fast forward to Hamilton's teenage years, and you'll find him working as a clerk in a trading company on St. Croix. Picture a 14-year-old boy with the mind of an economist and the resilience of a cockroach. He quickly learned the ropes, mastering the intricacies of trade, finance, and the cutthroat art of negotiation. His knack for business caught the eye of his boss, who decided to fund Hamilton's education in the colonies. Because, yes, even back then, networking was everything. By 1773, Hamilton landed in New York City, ready to make his mark on the world. Picture this young immigrant stepping off the boat with nothing but a few coins in his pocket and ambition oozing from his pores. At King's College, now Columbia University, he quickly made waves and friends in high places with his sharp intellect and even sharper pen. He was a prolific writer, penning essays that didn't just sit on dusty shelves, but were published and circulated, raising eyebrows and winning him influence. Hamilton's rise to prominence coincided with the rumblings of revolution. He was too young to sign the Declaration of Independence, but not too young to make a name for himself as a fierce advocate for the colonial cause. He joined a New York volunteer militia, and his prowess in the field soon got him noticed by none other than George Washington. You know, the guy who'd eventually become the first president of the United States. No big deal. Washington, recognizing talent when he saw it, made Hamilton his aide-de-camp. This wasn't just a cushy desk job. It was a position of immense trust and responsibility, akin to being the chief of staff to the CEO of a burgeoning nation. Hamilton was in the thick of it, drafting letters, formulating strategies, and occasionally reminding Washington to take a break from chopping down metaphorical cherry trees. Hamilton's charm was legendary, and his ability to get under people's skin was equally unmatched. He was one of those people who could charm your socks off while also making you want to strangle him with them. His friendships with influential figures weren't just about rubbing elbows. They were strategic alliances. He was the ultimate networker, understanding that to climb the ladder of success, you sometimes had to build the ladder yourself. There's a romanticized myth that Hamilton's journey from the Caribbean to the corridors of power was a straightforward rags-to-riches tale. But let's not sugarcoat it. Hamilton's path was fraught with challenges, betrayals, and enough political intrigue to make Game of Thrones look like a children's story. His rise wasn't just about sheer brilliance. It was also about navigating a world that was often hostile to immigrants and outsiders. In many ways, his story is less about destiny and more about dogged determination. Hamilton's early life is a testament to the power of ambition and the belief that with enough grit, you could overcome the odds stacked against you. He wasn't just a product of his environment. He was a force that reshaped it. And while the myths might paint him as a plucky hero who charmed his way to the top, the reality was far more complex. Hamilton was a man who seized opportunities with both hands, often stepping on toes and egos along the way. And in the rough and tumble world of 18th century politics, that was a skill worth more than its weight in gold or $10 bills. Now, let's talk about Hamilton's post-war escapades. After the dust settled on the Revolutionary War, Hamilton didn't just sit back and admire the newly liberated United States like it was a shiny new toy. Not our guy. He dove headfirst into the murky waters of politics, eager to mold this fledgling nation into something functional. You see, the Articles of Confederation, the nation's first constitution, had all the strength of wet tissue paper. States were squabbling like siblings over a single slice of cake, and the national government was too weak to intervene. Enter Hamilton, with his penchant for grand plans and an almost comical level of confidence. In 1787, Hamilton took center stage at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, a gathering that was less a meeting of the minds and more a political cage match. The goal was to patch up the Articles, but Hamilton had bigger ideas. He envisioned a robust federal government, powerful enough to unite the states and get things done. His plan was so radical it made the other delegates gasp, like he'd just suggested turning the White House into a theme park. But his influence was undeniable. He spent 6 hours delivering a speech that, while largely ignored at the time, set the stage for debates that would reshape the nation. Hamilton's ideas found a more receptive audience in the Federalist Papers. These 85 essays, co-authored with James Madison and John Jay, were like the op-eds of their day, except instead of debating whether pineapple belongs on pizza, they tackled the merits of a strong federal government. Hamilton churned out 51 of these essays, a testament to his relentless work ethic. He wrote like he had a personal vendetta against paper, and his penmanship was as tireless as his ambition. The Federalist Papers were published between 1787 and 1788, and they were instrumental in swaying public opinion towards ratifying the new Constitution. Hamilton was a master at weaving logic and rhetoric, convincing readers that a centralized government wasn't something to fear, but to embrace. His essays were peppered with quotable lines that could rally even the most skeptical minds. It's like he knew he was crafting the very backbone of American political thought. And let's not forget, Hamilton was doing this in a world without spell check or Control+Z. Respect. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Hamilton's political life was a high-speed chase through a minefield. His rivalry with Thomas Jefferson was the stuff of legend, a clash of titans that would birth the infamous two-party system. Hamilton, the Federalist, believed in a strong central government with an emphasis on industry, while Jefferson, the Democratic Republican, championed states' rights and an agrarian focus. It was a philosophical duel that played out on the national stage, with each man drawing vibrant lines in the sand. This rivalry was more than just political theater. It shaped the very structure of American government. By 1790, Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury, and he wasted no time flexing his economic prowess. He proposed the assumption of state debts by the federal government, a move as bold as it was controversial. Hamilton argued that it would bind the states together, but Jefferson and his allies saw it as a power grab. The resulting compromise known as the Compromise of 1790, was a classic case of political horse trading. In exchange for Hamilton's debt plan, the nation's capital would be relocated to the Potomac River, today's Washington, D.C. Politics, even then, was all about the art of the deal. Hamilton's economic vision didn't stop there. He established the first Bank of the United States in 1791, a centralized bank that would stabilize the economy and provide loans for industry and infrastructure. It was a revolutionary concept, and like every revolution, it had its fair share of critics. Opponents saw it as overreach, an ominous step towards monarchy. But Hamilton, ever the pragmatist, knew that a strong economy was the bedrock of a strong nation. Numbers don't lie, and Hamilton was as fluent in numbers as he was in English. However, Hamilton's pen wasn't always his best friend. Sometimes it was a trader with a flair for drama. His relentless writing led to some spectacular political blunders, not least of which was the Reynolds affair. In 1797, Hamilton published a pamphlet confessing to an extramarital affair with Maria Reynolds, a move that was supposed to clear his name of financial misconduct, but instead made him the subject of scandal. It was a masterclass in how not to handle a PR crisis. Yet Hamilton believed in transparency, even if it meant airing his dirty laundry. And as for the two-party system he inadvertently helped create, it was a legacy of both brilliance and irony. Hamilton envisioned a united nation, yet his actions laid the groundwork for political divisions that would endure for centuries. Politics, it turns out, is a game of chess where every move has consequences, and Hamilton's moves often came with seismic aftershocks. In the end, Hamilton was a paradox wrapped in a riddle. He was a man who could draft a constitution by day and duel a political opponent by night. His legacy is one of ambition and audacity, a reminder that the architects of nations are often just as flawed and fascinating as the structures they build. As we pause here in Hamilton's story, remember this. History is a tapestry woven with threads of triumph and tragedy, each one as essential as the last. Stay tuned, because our journey with Hamilton is far from over. And just when you thought Hamilton's story couldn't get any more dramatic, he stepped up to the plate as the first Secretary of the Treasury, a role that would have most mere mortals reaching for the aspirin. But not Hamilton. Oh no. He took it on with the gusto of a man who saw dollar signs in his sleep. It was 1789, and the United States was like a fledgling startup with no business plan. The national debt was a staggering $54 million, and the states were collectively in the hole for another $25 million. Enter Hamilton, the economic magician, ready to pull fiscal rabbits out of hats. First on his to-do list was the establishment of the Bank of the United States in 1791. Now, if you're thinking, Bank of the United States, sounds like just another bank with a fancy name. Think again. This was the first national bank, financial institution designed to stabilize the economy, manage the national debt, and inject some much-needed liquidity into the system. Hamilton was aiming for a financial revolution, and he was armed with more than just ledgers and quills. The bank was to be capitalized at $10 million, an eye-popping sum at the time, with the federal government holding a 20% stake. It was a bold move, and naturally it came with its fair share of detractors. Thomas Jefferson led the charge against it, fearing that a centralized bank would become a tool for tyranny. His vision of America didn't include a quasi-monopolistic financial institution. It was more about amber waves of grain than the clinking of coins. But Hamilton, always the pragmatist, argued that a strong banking system was crucial for economic growth. He saw the bank as a bridge to the future, while Jefferson saw it as a chain from the past. Then there was the matter of state debts. Hamilton's brainchild, the Assumption Plan, proposed that the federal government take on the leftover Revolutionary War debts of the states. His logic: a shared financial burden would unify the states under a robust federal government. But if you're thinking this was a walk in the park, think again. It was more like a stroll through a minefield. States like Virginia, which had already paid off much of their debt, were less than thrilled. They saw it as rewarding fiscal irresponsibility. But Hamilton didn't get where he was by playing it safe. He brokered the Compromise of 1790, a political masterstroke where the capital was relocated to a swampy patch of land along the Potomac River, in today's Washington, D.C. in exchange for Southern support of his debt plan. It was a classic case of quid pro quo, with Hamilton proving once again that politics is often less about ideology and more about the art of the deal. And speaking of deals, let's talk taxes. Specifically, the whiskey tax of 1,791. Imagine being a farmer in western Pennsylvania where whiskey wasn't just a drink, but a form of currency. Then picture the government swooping in to tax it. You'd probably be less than amused. The whiskey tax was part of Hamilton's grand plan to generate revenue to pay off the national debt, but it sparked the Whiskey Rebellion of 1794. Imagine the scene. Farmers with pitchforks and muskets, marching in protest like a scene from an 18th century action movie. Hamilton, never one to shy away from a fight, saw the rebellion as a direct challenge to federal authority. He convinced President Washington to muster a militia of 13,000 troops, a show of force that was less about quashing the rebellion and more about sending a message. The rebels dispersed without much of a fight, but the incident highlighted the deep-seated tensions between rural and urban America, tensions that would simmer for decades. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Was Hamilton a financial genius or just a savvy opportunist? Truth is somewhere in between. He was a visionary, yes, but his plans were also divisive. He laid the groundwork for a modern economy, but he did so by making powerful enemies. His policies stabilized the young nation, yet they also sowed the seeds of political division. Hamilton wasn't just playing financial chess. He was simultaneously inventing the rules and moving the pieces. Hamilton's tenure at the Treasury set the stage for future economic debates that would rage long after his untimely death in 1804. His vision for America was one of industry and innovation, a nation bound together by commerce and a shared financial destiny. But the romanticized image of Hamilton as a lone genius overlooks the contentious reality of his reforms. He was a man who thrived in the chaos of politics, a lightning rod for controversy, who understood that progress often requires stepping on a few toes, or a few thousand. In the end, Hamilton's legacy isn't just about numbers and banks. It's about the audacity to dream of a nation that could transcend its limitations. He was the architect of the American financial system, a system that would evolve and adapt, shaped by the very debates he ignited. And while his myth paints a picture of a financial wizard with all the answers, the reality is far more complex. Hamilton was a man of contradictions, a visionary who laid the foundation for an economic powerhouse while simultaneously lighting the fuse for future conflicts. As we leave Hamilton here, standing at the helm of the Treasury, remember that history is a dance between legend and reality, and Hamilton's story is one that continues to captivate, challenge, and inspire. So, as we leave Hamilton standing in the Treasury, let's pivot to the part of his life that reads more like a soap opera than a history book. If Hamilton's public life was a masterclass in political maneuvering, his personal life was a series of spectacular missteps that would make even the most seasoned tabloid editor blush. And what better place to start than the infamous Reynolds affair, a scandal that combined sex, money, and public confession into a cocktail that would have even the most jaded founding fathers raising their eyebrows. Picture this. It's 1791, and Hamilton, ever the workaholic, is approached by a woman named Maria Reynolds. She claims to be in dire straits, abandoned by her husband, and in desperate need of help. Hamilton, perhaps seeing himself as a knight in shining armor, or maybe just seeing an opportunity, agrees to assist. What starts as a charitable gesture quickly spirals into a full-blown affair. Now, if Hamilton had left it there, he might have gotten away with it. But this is Hamilton we're talking about, never one to do things by halves. Enter James Reynolds, Maria's husband, who saw dollar signs where others saw betrayal. The man was either a master blackmailer or just incredibly opportunistic. He demanded money from Hamilton to keep the affair under wraps, and Hamilton, in a move that was less than financially sound, complied. Fast forward to 1797, when Hamilton's political enemies got wind of the affair and the payments. Smelling blood in the water, they accused him of financial corruption. Now, here's where things get interesting. Rather than deny the allegations, or, keep quiet, Hamilton decided the best course of action was to publish a 95-page pamphlet confessing to the affair in explicit detail. It was like airing his dirty laundry on a national stage, complete with footnotes. Hamilton, ever the writer, couldn't resist the opportunity to craft his own narrative, even if it meant sacrificing his reputation. The pamphlet, which could rival any modern-day scandal for its sheer audacity, was a PR disaster. Yet, in Hamilton's mind, it was the lesser evil compared to accusations of financial misconduct. This scandal painted a bullseye on Hamilton's back, and his political rivals were all too happy to take aim. But if you think he was done making enemies, think again. Enter Aaron Burr, the man who'd become Hamilton's nemesis, and ultimately the Grim Reaper's +1 at their infamous duel. Burr and Hamilton had more in common than they'd probably like to admit. Both were ambitious, both were politically savvy, and both had a knack for making enemies. But where Hamilton was a man of principle, Burr was more of a political chameleon. Their feud was less about ideology and more about personal grudges, fueled by years of slights and political maneuvering. The tension between them reached a boiling point in 1804. Burr, then the sitting vice president, was running for governor of New York. Hamilton, never one to shy away from expressing his opinions, had made some less than flattering remarks about Burr, questioning his integrity and suitability for office. Burr, who had grown tired of being Hamilton's verbal punching bag, demanded an apology. Hamilton, ever the wordsmith, refused. The result? A challenge to a duel, a practice that, although illegal, was still seen as a way to defend one's honor. And thus, on the morning of July 11, 1804, Hamilton and Burr faced off on the dueling grounds of Weehawken, New Jersey, a spot oddly popular for such grim business. Accounts of what happened next are as murky as the Hudson River. Hamilton reportedly fired his shot into the air, a gesture meant to spare Burr's life. Burr, however, took aim and fired, hitting Hamilton in the abdomen. Hamilton died the next day, leaving behind a legacy as brilliant as it was controversial. His death was the crescendo of a life marked by ambition and audacity, a reminder that in politics, the line between friend and foe is often drawn in chalk. Burr, meanwhile, found himself ostracized, his political career effectively over. The duel, romanticized by some as an act of honor, was in reality a brutal reminder of the personal vendettas that simmer beneath the surface of political life. In the end, Hamilton's personal choices were as complex and contradictory as the man himself. He was a genius with a penchant for self-destruction, a visionary who couldn't resist a good fight. His scandals were more than just footnotes in his biography. They were integral to the myth and reality of Alexander Hamilton. And while his duel with Burr has been immortalized in song and story, it serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition and the cost of personal vendettas. As we pause here in Hamilton's saga, remember this. The man who helped shape a nation was also a man who wrestled with his own demons. His story is a testament to the duality of human nature, where brilliance and folly coexist, each amplifying the other. Stay tuned, because there's more to Hamilton's tale, a legacy that continues to shape the world long after the man himself left the stage. So, let's unravel the tangled threads of Alexander Hamilton's legacy, a tapestry as vibrant and nardy as the man himself. First off, Hamilton's policies, as contentious as they were, laid the groundwork for modern American economics. The national bank he championed, think of it as the granddaddy of today's Federal Reserve, established in 1791 with a capital of $10 million, an astronomical sum for the era. It set a precedent for federal involvement in the economy. Sure, it was about as popular as a tax collector at a tea party among his contemporaries, but it was undeniably effective. Hamilton's vision of a centralized financial system allowed the fledgling United States to stabilize its currency, manage debts, and spur industrial growth. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and you'll find echoes of Hamilton's financial architecture in every corner of the American economic landscape. And let's not forget his bold fiscal policies. Hamilton's assumption of state debts wasn't just a slick maneuver to quash fiscal chaos. It was a masterstroke of nation building. By convincing the federal government to absorb $25 million in state debt, he effectively tethered the states to a unified economic destiny. Critics cried foul, branding it a federal overreach, but the move was a crucial step in transforming a loose confederation of states into a cohesive nation. It was like giving the states a financial group hug, whether they liked it or not. This audacious gamble paved the way for a robust American economy, setting the stage for the country's rise as an industrial powerhouse. But Hamilton's legacy isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about the enduring fascination with the man himself. Enter Lin-Manuel Miranda, stage left. The 2015 musical, Hamilton, catapulted our Treasury whiz into the pop culture stratosphere, reimagining him as a hip-hop hero with a knack for wordplay. It's a testament to Hamilton's lasting charisma that, centuries after his death, he's headlining Broadway and winning Tony Awards. The show resonated with audiences, not just because of its catchy tunes and innovative storytelling, but because Hamilton's story is a quintessentially American tale of ambition, grit, and the immigrant experience. Miranda's portrayal breathed new life into Hamilton's myth, bringing his story to a new generation and reigniting debates about his legacy. In the realm of myth versus reality, Hamilton stands as a towering figure. The romantic narrative paints him as a self-made man, a relentless genius who rose from obscurity to shape a nation. And while there's a kernel of truth there, the full picture is far murkier. Hamilton was brilliant, yes, but also brash and occasionally reckless. His rise was fueled as much by strategic alliances and political maneuvering as by sheer talent. He was a man who knew how to play the game and wasn't afraid to break a few rules or people along the way. The myths polish the rough edges, but it's in those very imperfections that the real Hamilton emerges. As for the lessons we can glean from Hamilton's life, they are as multifaceted as his character. One clear takeaway is the power of vision. Hamilton saw the potential for an industrialized, economically unified America long before it became a reality. His foresight and willingness to think big, even in the face of fierce opposition, pushed the nation towards a future it hadn't yet imagined. He was the kind of leader who didn't just react to the world, but sought to reshape it. The audacity to dream and the courage to act on those dreams are lessons that resonate in any era. Yet, Hamilton's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition. His meteoric rise was matched by a dramatic fall, fueled in part by his own hubris. The Reynolds affair, a scandal of his own making, is a stark reminder of how personal indiscretions can overshadow public achievements. Hamilton's duel with Burr, another tragic chapter, underscores the destructive potential of personal vendettas. It's a sobering reminder that even the most brilliant minds can be their own worst enemies. Hamilton's legacy, then, is one of complexity. He was a visionary who helped shape the contours of modern America, yet his life was marked by contradictions and controversies. The story of Alexander Hamilton is a vivid tableau of ambition, innovation, and the human condition, flawed, fascinating, and ultimately profoundly influential. In the grand narrative of American history, Hamilton's chapter is a compelling blend of legend and reality, offering a timeless study of the power and peril of visionary leadership. As we draw to a close, it's fitting to reflect on the enduring impact of Hamilton's ideas. In a world where economic policy and political strategy continue to shape nations, Hamilton's vision remains as relevant as ever. His legacy is not just written in the annals of history, but lives on in the institutions, systems, and debates that define the modern world. So, as we bid adieu to Hamilton's story, remember this. History is not just a record of the past, but a dialogue with the present. And in that conversation, Hamilton still has much to say. In the wild, rolling hills and dense forests of ancient Europe, the Celts were busy crafting a social system so intricate, it could make a Byzantine bureaucrat break into a sweat. Forget any notions of one big, harmonious tribe singing Kumbaya around a communal fire. The Celts were a mosaic of tribes, each with their own quirks, rivalries, and power struggles that rival anything you'd see on a soap opera today. Think less All for One, and more Game of Thrones, with fewer dragons, but just as much drama. At the top of this Celtic social pyramid sat the chieftains, those swaggering leaders who were equal parts warrior, diplomat, and sometimes, let's be honest, outright schemers. Imagine having to juggle not just your clan's daily squabbles, but also the constant threat of your neighboring tribe deciding that your grazing land looked mighty fine this time of year. Chieftains were the rock stars of their age, commanding respect not just through brute force, but also through the subtle art of maintaining alliances, and keeping their warriors happy. Their power was as much about perception as it was about prowess, just like any modern politician, really. But let's not forget the warriors, those brave souls whose job was to keep the tribe safe, and occasionally to expand its wealth and territory through a bit of well-placed aggression. Being a warrior in Celtic society was no small feat. These were men and women who could wield a sword like they were born with it in their hand and charge into battle with the kind of fervor that might make you question their sanity. It was a role as respected as it was dangerous, with status and honor on the line every time they stepped onto the battlefield. Yet, it's worth noting that in Celtic culture, women could also rise to these ranks. So the next time someone tells you women warriors are a modern invention, feel free to point them towards the fierce Celtic women who could swing a sword and command respect with the best of them. And then there were the Druids. Ah, the Druids. No discussion of the Celts would be complete without these enigmatic figures who were part priest, part philosopher, and part walking encyclopedia of everything from the stars in the sky to the best time to plant your crops. If chieftains were the rock stars, Druids were the intellectual celebrities. These were the folks who held the keys to knowledge and spiritual guidance, wielding influence behind the scenes with a wisdom that could sway the course of decisions and even wars. They were the ones you went to if you needed to make sense of the universe or just wanted to know the right day to start your harvest. And while we're busting myths, let's cut through the fog of mystery. No, they weren't all about human sacrifice or chanting in the woods. Much like today's scientists and thinkers, they were often just trying to make sense of the world and keep society functioning smoothly. But oh, the politics. You see, the Celts were not just a singular entity, but a collection of tribes, each with their own leaders and agendas. They might come together in times of great need, but more often than not, they were as likely to be found skirmishing with each other as they were uniting against a common enemy. Alliances shifted like sand underfoot, and loyalty was often a matter of convenience rather than an unbreakable bond. It's a bit like a medieval version of office politics, everyone scrambling for control, maneuvering for power, and occasionally stabbing each other in the back, sometimes literally. And let's not overlook the economy of it all. The Celts were savvy traders, with a network stretching across Europe that dealt in everything from iron to salt. Their society was fueled by this trade, and the wealth it generated was a key pillar of their social structure. It was the chieftains who often orchestrated these trade deals, ensuring that their tribe prospered and grew. But wealth also meant power, and power, as always, was a double-edged sword. It could unify a tribe, just as easily tear it apart as rival factions vied for control of the riches. In the end, the social structure of the ancient Celts was as dynamic and multifaceted as the people who lived within it. It was a world where status was earned, and could be as fleeting as the morning mist. Each role, from chieftain to warrior to druid, was crucial in maintaining the delicate balance of their society. So, the next time you hear about the Celts as a united front of fierce warriors, remember, the truth is a lot more complicated and infinitely more interesting. So, if you're picturing the Celts as a ragtag bunch of wild-haired warriors, constantly at each other's throats and living off the land like a bunch of prehistoric hipsters, prepare for a surprise. These folks were no strangers to the grind of daily life, and their economic practices were anything but primitive. Let's take a stroll through a Celtic market and see just what made their economy tick. First stop, cattle farming. Forget Bitcoin, cattle was the original currency, moving money, if you will. In Celtic society, owning cattle was like having a stock portfolio bursting with blue chips. A single cow could be worth more than a year's wages for a laborer. Cattle were the backbone of the economy, and a status symbol rolled into one. You could measure a chieftain's wealth by the size of his herd, and these animals were as much about barter as they were about bragging rights. Need to seal a political alliance? Send over a few cows. Want to get married? Better have some bovine bling to back up that proposal. But it wasn't all about the cows. These enterprising Celts were also dab hands at metalwork, producing intricate designs that would make today's Etsy sellers green with envy. Celtic metalwork wasn't just pretty, it was practical and political. Iron was the steel of the day, and having the skill to work it into weapons, tools, and jewelry meant power and influence. A beautifully crafted sword wasn't just a means of protection, it was a status symbol, a declaration of your tribe's skill and sophistication. And let's not forget the torques, those iconic neck rings that screamed, "I have arrived," in Celtic high society. Wearing a torque was like rocking a designer label, signifying wealth and prestige. Now, if you think the Celts were all about keeping it local, think again. These folks had trade networks that would put ancient Amazon to shame. They had connections stretching from the British Isles all the way to the Mediterranean. The Celts traded tin from Cornwall, salt from Hallstatt, and even amber from the Baltic. It was a veritable smorgasbord of goods crisscrossing Europe, creating a web of trade as complex as the patterns on a Celtic nard. They were the masters of the barter system, swapping goods and services with a finesse that would make a Wall Street trader nod in approval. Of course, with trade comes the question of transportation. Forget Uber or FedEx. The Celts relied on trusty, albeit somewhat smelly, arc-drawn carts and riverboats to move their goods. These weren't your average delivery trucks, but rather the workhorses of the ancient world, plodding along muddy tracks and winding rivers to deliver everything from iron ingots to barrels of beer. And beer, by the way, was another Celtic specialty. Brewing was a craft perfected by these ancient harpy enthusiasts, who knew that a good brew could make tough negotiations a whole lot smoother. Now, let's tackle the elephant, or perhaps the war elephant, in the room. The image of the Celts as mere barbarians is as outdated as last year's smartphone. Sure, they had a penchant for raiding and a flair for battle, but their economic strategies were anything but brute force. They were savvy negotiators, capable of striking deals that would benefit their tribes and ensure their survival in a world where power was as fleeting as a summer rain. These sophisticated strategies were not just about survival, they were about thriving. But myths die hard, don't they? The romantic notion of the Celts as wild, untamed warriors has a certain allure. Yet, the reality is much more interesting. These tribes were not just surviving on the fringes of the Roman Empire, but actively engaging with it, adopting and adapting what worked while stubbornly holding on to their identity. It was a delicate dance between tradition and innovation, a balancing act that required cunning and courage in equal measure. In this world of iron and cattle, of beer and barter, the Celts crafted a society that was as vibrant as it was complex. They were not just warriors, but artisans, traders, and thinkers. So next time you hear someone dismiss the Celts as barbarians, remind them of the talks, the trade routes, and the tribes that wove the fabric of a culture as rich and dynamic as any in ancient history. And who knows, perhaps in the grand tapestry of human history, the Celts were indeed the original by local enthusiasts, championing a lifestyle that valued community, creativity, and a good deal at the market. But the story doesn't stop here. There's still much to uncover about these fascinating people. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the Celtic legacy, one intricate knot at a time. Speaking of unraveling the Celtic knot, let's dive into the heart and stomach of Celtic culture, their legendary feasts. If you think Thanksgiving is excessive, you haven't seen anything yet. The Celts turned feasting into an art form, with gatherings that would make a Las Vegas buffet look like a light snack. These weren't mere meals. They were social events that could last for days and involved the entire tribe, chieftains, warriors, druids, and even the humble farmer. Imagine tables groaning under the weight of roasted boar, venison, and an ocean of mead. If there was a Celtic motto, it might well have been eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we might be raiding. But these feasts were more than just an excuse to overindulge. They were a crucial part of the social fabric, a way for tribes to reinforce alliances, celebrate victories, and even resolve disputes. Picture this: two rival chieftains seated at a long table, each trying to outdo the other in hospitality, all while eyeing each other's portions like poker players sizing up their opponents. It was diplomacy with a side of roast pig. And let's not forget the entertainment. If you think your Spotify playlists are eclectic, the Celts were the original mixtape makers. Their festivals were a sensory overload of music and storytelling, with bards spinning tales as intricate as the patterns on a Celtic nard. These stories weren't just for fun. They were the history books of the time, preserving the deeds and misdeeds of ancestors long gone. You see, in a world where writing was a rare skill, oral tradition was the only way to keep the past alive. And if a bard happened to embellish a story here or there, who was going to fact-check them? These gatherings often coincided with major festivals, like Samhain, the Celtic New Year, which would eventually morph into our Halloween. Forget trick-or-treating. Samhain was a time when the veil between worlds was thin, and spirits were said to roam the earth. The Celts would light bonfires and don costumes to ward off any ill-intentioned ghosts. Talk about a party with a purpose. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely all this revelry was a man's game, right? Not so fast. Women in Celtic society played roles that would make even the most progressive modern thinkers do a double take. Far from being passive bystanders, Celtic women could own property, lead warriors into battle, and even rule as queens. Take Boudica, for example, the warrior queen of the Iceni tribe, who led a rebellion against Roman rule in 60 AD. She wasn't just a footnote in history. She was a force of nature, a reminder that women in the ancient world were capable of more than just keeping the hearth warm. And it wasn't just in times of war that women wielded power. In daily life, they were key players in the economy, running households and managing the resources that kept the tribe ticking. They were traders, craftswomen, and sometimes even druids, holding their own in a world that required both grit and grace. So the next time someone tries to tell you that strong women are a modern phenomenon, just point them towards the fiery Celtic lasses who paved the way. Of course, it wasn't all equal opportunities and mead-fueled merriment. The Celts lived in a world where survival was a constant battle, and social structures could be as rigid as they were complex. Chieftains might have been the rock stars, but it was the tribe that kept the show on the road. Everyone had their role, and stepping out of line could have serious consequences. It was a society that valued strength, honor, and loyalty, but it was also one where hierarchy was as important as the sword at your side. Now, let's circle back to those festivals for a moment. You might be wondering how they managed to pull off such grand events without the help of modern conveniences like refrigeration or Uber Eats. The answer lies in their resourcefulness. The Celts were masters of preservation, using salt to cure meats and smokehouses to keep fish fresh. And as for drinks, mead and beer were brewed with the kind of care and attention that would make any craft brewer nod in appreciation. These were people who knew how to throw a party, and they didn't need a smartphone to do it. In the end, the social norms and traditions of the Celts were as rich and layered as the landscapes they inhabited. From the raucous feasts that brought tribes together to the powerful women who defied convention, theirs was a world that was both familiar and utterly foreign. It was a society that thrived on the delicate balance between chaos and order, tradition and innovation, where the past was always present and the future was a story waiting to be told. So stay tuned, because there's more to come in the saga of the Celts, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. As the Celts danced between chaos and order, their belief systems were just as vibrant and multifaceted, a kaleidoscope of gods, spirits, and rituals that shaped their worldview. Forget about neat and tidy pantheons. The Celtic deities were an eclectic mix that would make a Marvel comic book look like a minimalist manifesto. These weren't your typical serene, all-knowing gods. Oh no, the Celtic gods and goddesses had more personality flaws than a reality TV cast, each with quirks and temperaments that would make even Zeus raise an eyebrow. Let's start with the headline act, Lugh, the sun god, who was a jack of all trades and master of, well, pretty much everything. Unlike your typical one-trick deities, Lugh was a god of many talents, from warfare to craftsmanship. Think of him as the Swiss army knife of the divine world. Then there was Morrigan, the fierce triple goddess of war, who'd make even the most fearsome warrior think twice about charging into battle. She was said to predict the outcome of wars, often taking the form of a crow to deliver her ominous messages. It's like having your fortune told by a particularly sassy bird of prey. Now, if you're thinking these gods were all just about smiting enemies and throwing lightning bolts, think again. Celtic deities were a lot more down to earth, literally. They were deeply connected to nature, with gods of rivers, trees, and even specific hills. This reverence for the natural world wasn't just about appeasing the divine. It was about survival. In a world where a bad harvest could spell disaster, it paid to keep the gods of agriculture and weather on your side. Enter the druids, the spiritual rock stars who acted as the bridge between the human and the divine. These were the folks who could turn a midsummer festival into an event that rivaled Coachella, complete with bonfires, music, and a bit of mystical flair. Druids were more than just priests. They were the keepers of knowledge, the ones who could interpret the will of the gods and offer guidance on everything from crop cycles to morality. Imagine if your local librarian, meteorologist, and philosopher were rolled into one, and you've got a glimpse of a druid's role. Their rituals might have looked like a combination of an intense yoga retreat and a rock concert, blending deep meditation with frenzied dancing and music. Forget the quiet solemnity of a modern church service. Celtic ceremonies were all about engaging the senses and connecting with the natural world. These rites were held in sacred groves, spaces that blurred the lines between the earthly and the ethereal. And while we're at it, let's squash the myth of rampant human sacrifice. Sure, there might have been some ritualistic offerings here and there, but the bloody spectacles are more the stuff of Roman tabloids than Celtic reality. Speaking of the Romans, let's dive into their propaganda machine. Picture this. You're a Roman looking to expand your empire into Europe, and you encounter these fierce, tattooed warriors with their wild hair and even wilder customs. It's easy to brand them as barbaric, untamed heathens. After all, it's hard to justify conquering a people if they seem just as civilized as you claim to be. Enter the classic case of ancient fake news. Roman writers painted the Celts as savage and irrational, a convenient narrative that helped justify military campaigns and the imposition of Roman culture. But here's the real kicker. The Celts were anything but uncivilized. Their society was structured and sophisticated, with complex laws and a rich oral tradition that kept their history alive. Sure, they had a penchant for battle, but they were also master craftsmen, traders and thinkers. The Roman portrayal of the Celts as wild heathens was as much about Roman insecurities as it was about Celtic realities. After all, it's easier to conquer someone if you convince yourself they need civilizing. Despite the Roman smear campaign, the Celts' spiritual life was rich and deeply ingrained in their daily existence. From seasonal festivals that marked the turning of the year to the worship of local deities that embodied the land's spirit, Celtic religion was a tapestry woven from the threads of tradition and nature. It was a belief system that embraced the chaotic beauty of life, acknowledging that even gods could be flawed, just like the humans who worshipped them. So, the next time you read about Celtic deities with their larger-than-life personalities, remember that these weren't just stories. They were reflections of a society that revered the natural world and saw the divine in every corner of their lives. They celebrated the complexity of existence, understanding that life was as unpredictable as the gods they worshipped. And if the Romans couldn't see that, well, maybe they just needed to get out of the marble forum and into the misty hills for a bit of perspective. As we continue to peel back the layers of Celtic culture, it becomes clear that theirs was a world filled with nuance and contradiction. It was a society where gods and humans alike danced to the rhythm of nature, where the line between the divine and the earthly was as blurred as the smoke rising from a druid's bonfire. And as we delve deeper into the Celtic legacy, we find that there's always more to discover beneath the surface, a vibrant history waiting to be uncovered, one knot at a time. Stay tuned for more revelations about these fascinating people and their enduring legacy. As we delve deeper into the Celtic legacy, the tale takes a darker turn. The Celts, once masters of their own destinies, soon found themselves facing the relentless tide of Roman expansion. Picture a Roman legion, disciplined, well-armored, and marching with all the precision of a military parade. Now, compare that to the Celts, fierce, brave, but often more like an impromptu jam session than a rehearsed symphony. The clash was inevitable, and the Celts quickly realized that Roman might was more than just a passing storm. The Romans, ever the engineers, built roads that stretched across Europe like arteries pumping the lifeblood of their empire. These weren't just for travel. They were strategic veins for military campaigns. The Roman general Julius Caesar himself famously chronicled his campaigns in Gaul, starting in 58 BC, where he systematically dismantled Celtic tribes like a master chess player knocking down pawns. And while Caesar may have been a bit of a self-promoter, his commentaries read more like a PR campaign than a military report. The impact on the Celts was anything but exaggerated. By the time Caesar finished his Gallic Wars in 51 BC, an estimated 1 million Celts were dead, and another million were enslaved. Harsh, but undeniably effective. Yet, in the face of such adversity, the Celtic spirit was not so easily snuffed out. They were like dandelions growing through cracks in the Roman pavement. Their resilience was legendary, and their culture adapted in ways that would leave a lasting impression. While the Romans built their cities and roads, the Celts continued to celebrate their festivals, tell their stories, and honor their gods. Sure, they had to swap the occasional torque for a Roman toga, but Celtic identity was more than just what they wore. It was in their blood. In fact, the Celts proved to be quite the cultural chameleons. They picked up Roman innovations like aqueducts and bathhouses, because who doesn't appreciate a good soak? But they also held on to their own customs, blending the old with the new in a way that was distinctly Celtic. This cultural fusion is evident even today. The Celtic influence on modern-day Europe is a testament to their adaptability. Ever wonder why Ireland's national symbol is a harp, or why Scottish kilts are still a thing? Thank the Celts for those cultural icons. But let's not sugarcoat it. The road to survival was a rocky one. The Romans were masters of assimilation, and the Celts had to navigate a world where their lands were being divided like slices of a particularly contested pie. Tribal leaders who once wielded power like a conductor's baton were now reduced to Roman vassals, their authority as much a relic as their swords. And while some Celts resisted, Hugh Boudicca's fiery revolt in 60 AD, which saw London burned to the ground, it was more of a blaze of glory than a sustained rebellion. Yet, the Celts' legacy refused to be extinguished. The Roman Empire may have been a juggernaut, but even it couldn't erase the Celtic influence. Take the Gaelic languages, for instance. Despite Rome's best efforts to Latinize Europe, languages like Irish, Scots Gaelic, and Welsh persisted, stubbornly clinging to the tongues of those who refused to forget their roots. Even today, these languages are spoken by millions, a living testament to a cultural resilience that outlasted even the mighty Romans. And what about those famous Celtic knots, you ask? They're more than just pretty patterns on jewelry. These intricate designs symbolize eternity, with no beginning or end, much like the Celtic influence that has woven its way through history, popping up in the most unexpected places. From the Arthurian legends to the Celtic motifs in medieval manuscripts, their impact is like an echo that never quite fades. So, what can we take away from the story of the Celts? Well, for starters, it's time to ditch the romanticized vision of them as mere wild warriors. Sure, they had their skirmishes, but they also had a rich culture that was as enduring as it was dynamic. They were traders, thinkers, and artists, whose legacy is as textured as the landscapes they once roamed. And while the Roman juggernaut might have rolled over them, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake, the Celts emerged from the rubble, their spirit and culture intact. In the end, the Celts teach us about resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. They remind us that identity is more than just the land you live on or the clothes you wear. It's a tapestry of beliefs, stories, and traditions that can withstand the test of time. So, the next time you see a Celtic symbol or hear a Gaelic word, remember the people who refused to be forgotten, who turned the tide of history into a legacy that continues to inspire. It's a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the spirit of a people can endure, echoing through the ages like a timeless tune. And really, isn't that the most romantic tale of all? Gold, not just any gold, but mountains of it. This isn't some fairy tale or a dream sequence from a blockbuster movie. It's the real-life story of Mansa Musa, the man who had so much gold he'd make Scrooge McDuck look like he was pinching pennies. Welcome to the Mali Empire in the 14th century, where Musa reigned supreme, not only as a king, but as a legend whose wealth seemed to defy the laws of economics. Mansa Musa, or Musa I of Mali if we're being formal, wasn't just sitting on a pile of riches. He was practically the human embodiment of a Fortune 500 list. The man ruled over a territory that was the envy of medieval geopolitics, spanning approximately 2 million square miles, covering modern-day Mali, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, and parts of Niger and Mauritania. The Mali Empire was no ordinary kingdom. It was an economic powerhouse, strategically positioned smack dab in the middle of the trans-Saharan trade routes. Imagine trade caravans stretching as far as the eye can see, laden with gold, salt, and other precious commodities that would make your average medieval trader salivate. Now, let's talk about the geographical jackpot Musa inherited. The empire's lands were rich, and I mean obscenely rich, in resources. We're talking gold mines that accounted for nearly half of the old world's gold. That's right, half. Ancient accounts are a bit fuzzy on the exact sums, but it's safe to say that Musa's wealth was estimated in the hundreds of billions in today's dollars. And while we're on the subject of wealth, let's not forget Timbuktu, the crown jewel of Mali. This city wasn't just a trade hub. It was an intellectual beacon, home to the Sankore University and libraries teeming with manuscripts that covered everything from astronomy to law. But how did Musa climb to such dizzying heights of power? The answer lies in a somewhat unconventional succession. Musa wasn't born into the role of a king. Nope, he was appointed deputy to the ruling Mansa, Abu Bakr Roman II. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Abu Bakr, seemingly inspired by the spirit of adventure, or perhaps influenced by too many tales of distant lands, decided to embark on an ambitious voyage across the Atlantic. Spoiler alert, he never returned. So, with the boss out of the picture, Musa took the reins in 1312. Musa wasn't about to let his newfound power gather dust. Oh no, he expanded his empire like a medieval Monopoly player on a winning streak. Under his rule, the Mali Empire garbled up territories faster than you can say land grab. He annexed the city of Gao, a critical trading center, and further extended his influence over the trans-Saharan routes, ensuring that his empire remained at the epicenter of African commerce. But Musa's real stroke of genius was realizing that power wasn't just about land and gold, it was about people. He understood that a well-structured administrative system was crucial for maintaining control over such a vast empire. So, he went all out, organizing his empire into provinces, each with its own governor and tax system. It was a medieval version of a corporate restructuring, cutting edge for its time. Musa's investment in his empire wasn't limited to bureaucracy. He poured resources into building mosques, schools, and libraries, effectively transforming Mali into a cultural and intellectual hub. His patronage of learning and arts was legendary, attracting scholars, poets, and architects from across the Islamic world. It's not every day that a king invests in education instead of just hoarding gold. But then again, Musa wasn't your average ruler. Of course, no tale of wealth and power is complete without a bit of myth-busting. While Musa's riches have been romanticized over the centuries, it's crucial to remember the harsh realities. The Mali Empire, like many others, thrived on the backs of laborers, some of whom were enslaved. It's a grim reminder that history's glittering narratives often have darker undercurrents. So, there you have it. Mansa Musa, the man, the myth, the monolith of wealth. His empire wasn't built in a day, nor was it the product of mere luck. It was a calculated expansion, a blend of savvy trade practices and an eye for strategic alliances. And while the man himself may have passed into legend, the impact of his reign reverberates through time, reminding us that behind every grand empire lies a complex tapestry of ambition, intellect, and yes, a bit of gold dust. As Mansa Musa's empire continued to thrive, he decided it was time for a little international PR. And by little, I mean a spectacle so grand, it would make any modern influencer's social media blitz look like a lemonade stand on a deserted street corner. Picture this. The year is 1324, and Musa is about to embark on his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca. This wasn't just a spiritual journey, though it was that too. It was a public relations masterstroke designed to broadcast his kingdom's grandeur to the world. We're talking a caravan of epic proportions. Musa didn't just stroll out of Mali with a light backpack and a prayer book. Oh no, he rolled out with an entourage that could have filled a small town. Reports suggest he took with him approximately 60,000 men. Yes, you heard that right, 60,000. And if that wasn't enough to drop jaws from Timbuktu to Cairo, he also brought along hundreds of pounds of gold dust, 80 camels each carrying 300 pounds of gold, and a veritable who's who of the Mali Empire's elite. This was not a vacation, it was an imperial procession. But let's dive into the logistics of this massive road trip. Imagine the sheer coordination needed to move an army-sized group through the Sahara Desert. We're talking about an enterprise that would make any modern-day wedding planner sweat bullets. From ensuring a steady supply of food and water to managing the daily routines of thousands of people, it was a feat of organizational genius, or madness, depending on how you look at it. While the romanticized versions of this journey paint a picture of opulence and magnanimity, the reality was far more complex. Sure, Musa was handing out gold like it was candy at a parade, but there were economic consequences that rippled far beyond the immediate fanfare. Take Cairo, for instance. When Musa and his entourage swept through the city, they spent so lavishly that they inadvertently caused a gold crash. Let that sink in for a moment. His generosity devalued the currency. Gold's price plummeted across the region, and the effects were felt for over a decade. Talk about an unintended financial hiccup. This brings us to the myth-busting portion of our tale. The narrative of a benevolent king showering wealth upon the masses is undoubtedly appealing, but it glosses over the economic turmoil that followed in his wake. Musa's spending spree in cities like Cairo didn't just boost local economies, it destabilized them. Inflation skyrocketed as the sudden influx of gold disrupted established markets. Imagine waking up one day to find that the price of your morning coffee had tripled overnight, not because of a shortage, but because someone decided to throw a golden party. And then there's the question of how Musa's journey was perceived by those outside the Mali Empire. For many, it was the first time they'd even heard of this African kingdom brimming with wealth and power. Musa's pilgrimage put Mali on the map, literally and figuratively. European cartographers, for instance, began to feature the Mali Empire prominently, often depicting Musa with a gold nugget in hand. Yet, these representations were as much about myth as they were about reality, a blend of awe and misunderstanding that often accompanies tales of far-off lands. But let's not lose sight of the pilgrimage's dual purpose. Beyond the dazzling displays of wealth, Musa's journey was a deeply religious undertaking. As a devout Muslim, he sought to fulfill one of Islam's 5 pillars by visiting Mecca. His faith was as integral to his identity as his riches. The pilgrimage allowed him to connect with the broader Islamic world, forging spiritual and political alliances that would bolster Mali's standing on the international stage. So, as we marvel at the audacity and scale of Musa's pilgrimage, let's remember it was more than a simple trek across continents. It was a meticulously orchestrated display of wealth and power, a strategic move to elevate his empire's status, and a testament to the complex interplay of faith, economics, and human ambition. Musa's journey was a microcosm of his reign, grand, ambitious, and not without its complications. But hey, whoever said making history was easy? Now, if you thought Mansa Musa's pilgrimage was the grand finale of his reign, think again. The man was just getting started. After returning from his epic journey, Musa had a vision for Timbuktu that would cement his legacy far beyond the riches he scattered like confetti. He set his sights on transforming this dusty trade post into a shining beacon of knowledge and culture. Forget Silicon Valley. Timbuktu was about to become the medieval world's hardest intellectual real estate. Let's dive into Musa's blueprint for Timbuktu, starting with the Jingreba Mosque. Built in 1327, this architectural masterpiece wasn't just a place of worship. It was a statement. Crafted by Andalusian architect Abu Ishaq Saheli, Musa reportedly shelled out 200 kilograms of gold for his services. If you think hiring a top architect today is expensive, try paying in solid gold bars. The mosque's design was a marvel of its time, combining local materials like mud and wood with the intricate artistry typical of Andalusian influence. It wasn't just about how it looked. The mosque was a symbol of Musa's commitment to Islam and his desire to make Timbuktu a spiritual and educational hub. And then there's the Sankor University, which evolved from a simple mosque into a thriving center of learning. Picture this: scholars, students, and intellectuals from across the Islamic world flocking to Timbuktu like it was the Coachella of academia. The university boasted thousands of manuscripts, covering subjects from mathematics and astronomy to medicine and law. It was one of the world's earliest universities, a medieval think tank that attracted the brightest minds of the era. Musa's investment in education wasn't just about prestige. It was a strategic move to draw talent and innovation into his empire. Now, here's where things get interesting. Timbuktu's status as a legendary city of gold and wisdom isn't just the stuff of fairy tales, though plenty of those exist too. The allure of this far-off land was partly fueled by European explorers' fevered imaginations. They spun tales of a city so wealthy and learned, it was practically shimmering on the horizon. In reality, While Timbuktu was indeed a center of trade and scholarship, it wasn't exactly the gilded utopia of legend. But hey, why let facts get in the way of a good story? The myth of Timbuktu as an unreachable paradise has persisted through the centuries, a testament to the power of narrative over reality. The city did flourish under Musa's patronage, but it's essential to remember that it was also a functioning part of a vast trade network. The real magic of Timbuktu lay in its ability to connect diverse cultures and ideas, much like today's global cities. It wasn't just the gold or the manuscripts. It was the exchange of knowledge and commerce that made it legendary. As we peel back the layers of myth and reality, let's not overlook the economic realities underpinning these cultural achievements. Building mosques and universities wasn't just about faith or intellectual curiosity. It was an economic strategy. Timbuktu's rise as a knowledge center attracted traders, scholars, and artisans, creating a bustling economy that benefited the entire empire. Musa understood that wealth wasn't just measured in gold, but in the flow of ideas and people. But here's the kicker. While Musa's investments in education and culture were groundbreaking, they weren't purely altruistic. By elevating Timbuktu, he was also fortifying his empire's influence. Knowledge, after all, is power. And in a world where information was as precious as gold, Musa's strategy was nothing short of genius. He was building an empire of the mind, ensuring Mali's dominance not just through economic might, but intellectual leadership. So, as we wrap our minds around Musa's vision for Timbuktu, let's appreciate the duality of his legacy. On one hand, there's the romantic tale of a golden city at the edge of the Sahara, a beacon of learning and culture. On the other, the harsh reality of an empire built on strategic maneuvering, economic foresight, and a bit of myth-making magic. Mansa Musa's story is a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. And with that, we've only scratched the surface of Musa's monumental contributions. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating tapestry of his reign, where wealth, power, and intellect intertwined in ways that continue to captivate us today. As Mansa Musa's grand vision for Timbuktu unfolded, let's pivot to the nuts and bolts of empire building, because even the most dazzling gold-laden spectacles need a solid foundation. Musa wasn't just doling out gold and building mosques. He was orchestrating a well-oiled machine to maintain his sprawling empire. And trust me, keeping control over 2 million square miles of territory was no walk in the Sahara. Imagine trying to manage an empire where your nearest province is as far from your capital as Mars is from Earth, or at least that's how it must have felt in the 14th century. Mansa Musa knew he couldn't be everywhere at once. So, he devised a shrewd administrative strategy that relied on a network of governors, each tasked with running a slice of the empire. These governors were like the regional managers of a medieval megacorporation. They were responsible for tax collection, law enforcement, and maintaining order. Musa didn't just appoint any old buddy from the royal court. He selected individuals based on merit and loyalty. Think of it as an early version of a performance-based promotion, minus the annual review and stock options. The tax system under Musa was no haphazard affair either. It was a structured operation designed to keep the empire's coffers brimming. Taxes were levied on trade, agriculture, and naturally, gold production. And while nobody enjoys paying taxes, even in the Middle Ages, this system was crucial for funding everything from military campaigns to Musa's ambitious building projects. Speaking of the military, let's talk about the muscle behind Mali's might. Musa didn't just have a well-organized administration. He had a formidable army to back it up. With cavalry and infantry units, the Mali military was a force to be reckoned with. They were the guardians of the trade routes, ensuring that the empire's economic lifelines remained secure. Musa's diplomatic maneuvers were equally impressive. He wasn't a warmonger. He preferred to use diplomacy to expand his influence. By forging alliances with neighboring states and establishing friendly relations with distant powers, Musa ensured that his empire was both respected and feared. It was a game of chess, and Musa was a grandmaster, always thinking several moves ahead. But let's not get too carried away with the grandeur. Maintaining such a vast empire was a juggling act with more balls in the air than a circus performer on a sugar high. For every province that paid its taxes and followed the rules, there was another teetering on the edge of rebellion. Musa's governors had to constantly quell uprisings, manage local disputes, and ensure that the empire's laws were enforced. It was a delicate balance, one that required constant vigilance, and at times, brute force. The opulence of the Mali Empire was undeniable, yet it masked the inherent challenges of ruling over such a diverse and expansive territory. For every glittering mosque and bustling market, there were logistical nightmares that could rival any modern-day bureaucratic quagmire. Communication was slow, roads were treacherous, and let's not even start on the perils of maintaining a supply chain in the middle of the Sahara. And here's a little myth-busting for you. While the Mali Empire was indeed a beacon of wealth and power, it wasn't immune to the same issues that plagued other empires. Corruption, inefficiency, and power struggles were as much a part of Musa's world as they are in any government today. The romantic image of a perfectly run kingdom is just that, a romantic image. Yet, despite these challenges, Musa's reign was a testament to the power of strategic vision and effective governance. It was his ability to adapt, innovate, and inspire that kept the empire thriving. His legacy isn't just one of gold and grandeur. It's a reminder that behind every successful empire lies a complex web of human ambition, resilience, and often a good dose of luck. So, as we continue our journey through the Mali Empire, let's keep in mind that Mansa Musa's story is far from over. There's more to uncover about his reign, his strategies, and the empire that, despite its challenges, continues to captivate our imaginations. Stay tuned as we peel back more layers of this fascinating historical tapestry. With all the complexity and grandeur of Mansa Musa's reign laid out like a historical buffet, let's dig into the lasting impact of this golden era and the tales left in its shimmering wake. Musa's Mali was not just a flash in the pan of history. It was a catalyst that set off ripples across continents and centuries. The empire he built, with its glittering cities and bustling trade routes, became a template for greatness. But like all great things, it didn't last forever. So what became of the Mali Empire after Musa hung up his crown? Well, to put it bluntly, it went the way of many a mighty kingdom, downhill, albeit slowly. For starters, Musa's successors had some colossal shoes to fill, and it's fair to say they struggled with the laces. The empire's foundations, once so robust, began to show signs of stress as internal squabbles and external pressures mounted. You could say the empire was like a grand old house that needed constant maintenance, but the new occupants weren't quite up to the task. The decline wasn't immediate, of course. The Mali Empire continued to enjoy prominence for several decades after Musa's death around 1337. However, the empire gradually began to fragment, with provinces breaking away like rebellious teenagers seeking independence. By the late 14th century, the empire had lost much of its territory to neighboring kingdoms like the Songhai, which eventually usurped Mali's place as the dominant power in West Africa. Talk about a plot twist worthy of a medieval soap opera. But let's not let the empires fall overshadow Musa's enduring legacy. His reign transformed West Africa into a global player, and his contributions to culture and learning established Mali as a beacon of knowledge. Timbuktu, with its universities and libraries, remained a hub of intellectual activity long after the empire's political influence waned. It's a bit like how some musicians remain on the charts even after they've stopped touring. Musa's cultural impact outlived his political one. The man himself became the stuff of legend, his wealth and piety morphing into tales that echoed across the centuries. European explorers and writers spun stories of a king so rich he could crumble economies with a flick of his wrist. These narratives, while exaggerated, helped cement his status as one of history's wealthiest figures. Maps from the time began to depict Africa not just as a distant, mysterious land, but as the home of a king holding a golden nugget, an image as iconic as it is mythologized. However, as appealing as the myth may be, it's crucial to remember the reality beneath the glitter. Musa's wealth wasn't just a personal fortune. It was the product of a complex economic system that relied heavily on trade, and yes, the labor of countless workers, including those enslaved. It's a sobering reminder that behind every story of opulence lies the toil and hardship of many, a truth as relevant today as it was then. So, what lessons does Mansa Musa's story offer us modern-day mortals? For one, it's a testament to the power of vision and leadership. Musa's ability to expand his empire's influence through strategic alliances, economic savvy, and cultural investments is a masterclass in governance. Yet, it also serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of power and the importance of sustainable leadership. Empires, like empires before them, are only as strong as their ability to adapt and innovate. And let's not forget the importance of narrative. Musa understood the power of storytelling, using his pilgrimage to Mecca as a platform to project Mali's wealth and sophistication to the world. In doing so, he shaped how his empire, and Africa more broadly, were perceived on the global stage. It's a lesson in public relations that even the most seasoned spin doctors could learn from. Control the narrative, and you control your legacy. In the end, Mansa Musa's story is a rich tapestry woven from threads of ambition, faith, and an eye for the grand gesture. His reign was a golden era that, while tarnished by time, continues to shine in the annals of history. Whether through the legends that surround him or the lasting institutions he helped to build, Musa's influence is undeniable. So next time you hear a tale of unimaginable wealth or a city of gold, remember the man who lived that dream and left a legacy that still dazzles us today. Nefertiti's story begins in a place as mysterious as she is, the dusty corridors of ancient Egypt around 1353 BC. Now, let's be honest. Trying to piece together her origins is like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with a few missing pieces and no picture on the box. But we do know this much. She pops up in the historical record as a young woman with enough charisma to light up the Nile. And she's not just any young woman. She's about to marry Akhenaten, a pharaoh who's got some truly wild ideas about how to run a country. Akhenaten, for his part, isn't your typical Egyptian pharaoh. He's the kind of guy who sees the entire pantheon of Egyptian gods and thinks, nah, let's try something new, which is how he ends up being the poster boy for monotheism in Egypt. Instead of the usual divine zoo, he decides to worship just one god, Aten, the sun disk. This is equivalent to waking up one day and deciding that the only food you'll eat is kale. Bold, sure, but not exactly popular with everyone. Nefertiti steps into this swirling vortex of political reform and religious upheaval like she's just walked onto a catwalk. The marriage itself is pretty strategic. No surprise there. We're talking about a union that solidifies power within the royal family and aims to push Akhenaten's one-guard policy. It's the kind of political maneuver that makes Game of Thrones look like a picnic in the park. Ancient Egypt, after all, was no stranger to intrigue, and the royal family was often as much a battlefield as any dusty plain in the empire. Weddings in ancient Egypt weren't just about the bride and groom playing nice. They were power consolidations where family trees were pruned and grafted like an over-ambitious gardener having at it. And speaking of gardens, the royal family had many, but the real question was whether they could cultivate a stable kingdom. Nefertiti, with her famous bust and all, becomes a symbol of this new era. She's not just a pretty face, she's a power player in her own right. While Nefertiti and Akhenaten are busy with their religious revolution, Egypt itself is humming along with its usual socio-economic challenges. The economy of Egypt at this time isn't just grand monuments and a lot of sand. It's a complex web of agriculture, trade and labor, where the Nile plays the starring role. The river's annual inundation is the lifeblood of the country, turning the desert into a fertile paradise. Well, when it feels like it. A bad flood year, and suddenly the granaries are emptier than a pharaoh's promises. Then there's the political landscape to consider. Egypt isn't just a solitary kingdom. It's basically the ancient world's version of a massive conglomerate. You've got territories in the Levant, Nubia, and beyond, all looking to Egypt for leadership, or at least for a slice of the pie. Keeping this empire running smoothly requires more than a bit of savvy, particularly when your boss is more interested in sun disks than diplomacy. It's in this context that Nefertiti and Akhenaten try to push their revolutionary agenda. Building a new capital at Amarna, they aim to create a city dedicated to their god, Aten. It's like constructing a whole new Vatican in the middle of the desert. This city isn't just bricks and mortar. It's a statement of intent, a massive gamble that the people will rally behind their vision. Spoiler, not everyone thinks this is a great idea. Yet, while the couple is busy trying to convince everyone that Aten is the only deity worth their time, Life in Egypt goes on. Farmers are still farming, scribes are still scribbling, and the bureaucracy is as labyrinthine as ever. The economy has to keep ticking over despite the upheaval, and that means taxes, trade, and tariffs. Those granaries don't fill themselves, after all. The royal family, meanwhile, is a microcosm of this larger political chess game. Marriages, alliances, and rivalries are the order of the day. Nefertiti, with her iconic beauty and sharp mind, becomes an essential player in this drama. Her bust might be the thing that captures imaginations thousands of years later, but it's her ability to navigate these treacherous waters that defines her reign. But it's not all intrigue and power plays. There are moments of absurdity, too. Take the royal propaganda machine, for instance. Nefertiti and Akhenaten commission countless statues and reliefs showing their devotion to Aten, which is all fine and dandy, until you realize they had to keep chiseling out the names of old gods from existing monuments. It's like trying to rebrand a company by going around and scratching out all the old logos, tedious and not exactly foolproof. Meanwhile, the people of Egypt are caught in this tug-of-war between tradition and innovation. On one hand, they've got the allure of a new religious order, promising them a direct line to the divine. On the other, there's the comforting familiarity of the old gods, who have served them well for centuries. The average Egyptian probably didn't care much for theological debates. They were more interested in whether the harvest would be good and if they could afford a new pair of sandals. So, as Nefertiti and Akhenaten push forward with their plans, they're not just rewriting religious texts. They're reshaping the very fabric of Egyptian society. The stakes are high, and the risks are enormous. For Nefertiti, it's all part of the grand tapestry of history she's weaving, one that will leave an indelible mark on Egypt for generations to come. And so, with Nefertiti and Akhenaten leading the charge, Egypt found itself on a roller coaster of change that no one had exactly signed up for. Now, if you've ever tried to convince a cat to switch from tuna to tofu, you might have some idea of the challenge the royal couple faced. The old gods weren't just deities. They were deeply woven into the fabric of daily life, culture, and even the economy. It was like trying to pull the thread from a sweater without unraveling the whole thing. But Akhenaten wasn't deterred. Nope, he was all in, and Nefertiti was right there with him. Together, they embarked on one of the boldest projects in ancient history, the construction of a brand new capital city, Akhetaten, known today as Amarna. Picture this, a sprawling city rising from the desert sands, a concrete manifestation of their devotion to Aten. It was both a literal and symbolic move, a fresh start away from the clutches of traditional power centers, like Thebes and Memphis. The logistics of building Akhetaten were nothing short of Herculean. We're talking about mobilizing thousands of workers, laboring under the relentless Egyptian sun, all to construct a city that spanned roughly 8 miles along the Nile. And they weren't just throwing up a few mud brick huts either. They were building temples, palaces, and residential areas, each one a testament to their commitment to Aten. However, here's where the romantic tale takes a sharp turn into reality. Building a new capital isn't cheap. The financial strain was immense. Imagine trying to construct a new Washington, D.C., complete with monuments and infrastructure, in the middle of nowhere. The Treasury must have felt the pinch. Workers needed to be paid, materials had to be sourced, and all the while, the rest of Egypt still needed to function. Trade routes had to stay open, and taxes needed collecting. Because let's face it, even the most revolutionary regime still needs its tax revenue. The costs of this grandiose project were staggering. Ancient records suggest that Akhenaten's religious reforms and his city-building spree may have drained the coffers in a way that would make even today's most extravagant budget deficits look like pocket change. It's estimated that over 20,000 people were involved in the construction of Akhetaten, from artisans crafting intricate carvings to laborers hauling stone. The city was designed to house up to 50,000 people, a population that was suddenly uprooted from their familiar surroundings. Yet, amid the grandeur and ambition, there was a glaring oversight. Akhetaten, for all its visionary splendor, was situated in a rather inconvenient location. The city wasn't exactly at the heart of the country's trade routes or agricultural hubs. It was more like building a luxury resort in the middle of a desert without considering how people would actually get there or why they'd want to stay. This oversight wasn't just a logistical nightmare. it also put a strain on the kingdom's resources. Transporting food, water, and goods to Akhetaten added another layer of complexity to an already precarious economic situation. The city itself was designed with a laser focus on the sun. Temples were constructed to maximize the sunlight, a fitting tribute to Aten. But as beautiful as it was, Akhetaten was also a political statement, a not-so-subtle way of saying, out with the old, in with the new. This shift didn't sit well with everyone. The priestly class, who had enjoyed considerable power under the old polytheistic system, found themselves sidelined, their influence waning as Akhenaten centralized religious authority. Now, if you're thinking this sounds like a recipe for dissent, you'd be right. The old guard wasn't going quietly into that monotheistic night. Resistance simmered beneath the surface, a quiet but persistent hum of discontent. Akhenaten's vision of a unified religious state under Aten might have been utopian in his eyes, but to others it was nothing short of sacrilege. Meanwhile, Nefertiti was more than just a figurehead in this drama. Her role was crucial, her image carefully crafted to project power and piety. She was depicted in art as being nearly equal to Akhenaten, a testament to her influence and status. Behind the serene images of her offering to Aten, there was a political savvy at play. Nefertiti was navigating a landscape fraught with potential pitfalls, balancing the demands of governance with the necessity of maintaining support among the populace. As the city rose, so too did the pressures on the royal couple. The new capital was a beacon for their religious revolution, but it also became a lightning rod for criticism. The economic toll was significant, and whispers of dissatisfaction circulated among the Egyptian elite. The empire was still vast, with territories far beyond the borders of the Nile Valley. Maintaining control required more than just spiritual fervor. It required a deft hand in diplomacy and military might. And while Akhenaten might have been more interested in celestial matters, Nefertiti was acutely aware of the earthly challenges before them. She was a queen who understood the delicate balance of power, both at home and abroad. As the city of Akhetaten grew, so did the complexity of managing an empire in flux. The old guards might have been sidelined, but they were far from forgotten, their temples still standing as silent witnesses to the turmoil of the times. In the end, the story of Akhetaten is one of ambition and excess, of vision and vanity. It's a reminder that even the most grandiose plans can falter under the weight of their own expectations. For Nefertiti and Akhenaten, the city was the embodiment of their revolutionary spirit, a bold declaration of their faith in Aten. But as history would show, revolutions are seldom simple, and the sands of time have a way of erasing even the most determined efforts. As we ponder the rise of Akhetaten, we're left with the tantalizing question of what might have been. Could the city have thrived under different circumstances, or was it always destined to be a footnote, cautionary tale of ambition unchecked by practicality? With the stakes as high as they were, and the risks as palpable as the desert heat, it's a wonder they dared to dream at all. Yet, dream they did, leaving behind a legacy as enduring as the sun itself, a testament to the audacity of hope and the inevitability of change. As ambitious as Akhetaten was, it was only one layer of Nefertiti's intricate tapestry. While the city itself was a bold political statement, Nefertiti's true mastery lay in the art of image-making, something she wielded with the precision of a pharaoh's scribe. Nowhere is this more evident than in the iconic bust of Nefertiti, which has become as synonymous with ancient Egypt as pyramids and papyrus. But before we get swept away by her timeless beauty, let's pause and consider how this image was crafted and why it continues to captivate us. The famous bust, discovered in 1912 by a German archaeological team led by Ludwig Borchardt, is more than just a snapshot of Nefertiti's face. It's the ancient world's equivalent of a celebrity glamour shot. Sculpted in 1345 BC by the artist Thutmose, this limestone masterpiece is adorned with the kind of detail that would make even today's retouching software blush. The bust captures Nefertiti with an elongated neck, elegant cheekbones, and an inscrutable smile, features so perfect they make one wonder whether there was a little artistic license at play. Now, let's not kid ourselves. This isn't just art imitating life. This is art as political propaganda, a calculated move by the royal PR machine to project an image of divine beauty and authority. Nefertiti wasn't just the queen consort. She was the living embodiment of Aten's grace on earth. The bust, then, less a mirror and more a canvas, painted with the brushstrokes of idealized perfection. In today's terms, think of it as the ancient equivalent of a meticulously curated Instagram feed, complete with filters and all. But why such an emphasis on image? Well, in a time where most Egyptians couldn't read or write, the visual was king. Nefertiti's likeness would have been a powerful tool for influencing public perception, reinforcing her status as a divine and untouchable figure. It was less about reality and more about shaping a narrative that helped stabilize her husband's religious reforms by presenting a vision of celestial harmony and beauty. However, the bust raises questions about authenticity. Was Nefertiti truly as flawless as the sculpture suggests, or was this an ancient exercise in airbrushing? Ancient Egypt wasn't exactly known for its candid photography, and much like today, the images that survive are often those that served a purpose. Nefertiti's bust wasn't just a representation of her physical appearance, it was a statement of her political and spiritual power, a way to cement her place both in Akhenaten's court and in the pantheon of Egypt's rulers. In terms of celebrity culture, Nefertiti was centuries ahead of her time. She understood the power of branding long before the Kardashians made it a family business. The artistic representations of her, whether the bust, reliefs, or statues, were all part of a carefully orchestrated campaign to maintain her image as the Queen of Queens. Her likeness was not only a tool for domestic policy, but also an instrument of foreign diplomacy, sending a message to allies and adversaries alike of Egypt's strength under her and Akhenaten's rule. And let's not forget the economic implications of this iconography. The production of such high-quality art wasn't cheap. The bust itself, made from limestone covered in stucco and painted in vibrant colors, required skilled artisans and costly materials. This wasn't just a whim. It was a calculated investment in the royal image, one that required resources at a time when funds were already being stretched thin by the construction of Akhenaten. Yet, as with all things, there was a flip side. While the royal couple basked in the glow of their divine personas, the reality for many Egyptians was less than idyllic. The lavish expenses on art and capital construction didn't sit well with everyone, especially when juxtaposed with the everyday struggles of the populace. This disconnect between the royal image and the lived experience of the average Egyptian was a tension that simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. In this light, the bust of Nefertiti becomes more than just an artistic marvel. It's a symbol of the dichotomy between image and reality, a reminder of the power and pitfalls of public relations. It's easy to be drawn in by the allure of her beauty, but the true story lies in understanding why that beauty was so meticulously crafted. History, after all, is not just about the tales we tell, but the intent behind them. As we continue to explore Nefertiti's reign, we must remember that her story is as much about perception as it is about power. Her image, both literally and metaphorically, was not just a reflection of her time, but an active participant in shaping it. And while the sands of time may have buried many of the intricacies of her life, the bust endures, a testament to the timelessness of art and the enduring allure of an enigmatic queen. Yet, the narrative doesn't end here. Art and culture of Nefertiti's reign were not just about her. They were part of a broader artistic revolution that saw a radical departure from traditional Egyptian styles. Under Akhenaten's reign, art became more naturalistic, reflecting everyday life with a candidness that was previously unseen. This shift can be seen in the Amarna style, where pharaohs were depicted with elongated limbs and exaggerated features, images that were more expressionist than realist. This artistic evolution was a reflection of the broader cultural shifts taking place. The old ways were being challenged, not just in religion, but in every facet of life. Nefertiti's image, then, was a microcosm of this larger transformation, a symbol of both the promise and peril of change. It was a reminder that while art can capture the essence of a moment, it is also a tool for shaping future perceptions. As we delve deeper into Nefertiti's story, the interplay between art, politics, and culture becomes ever more apparent. Her reign was a time of unprecedented change, but it was also a period of great uncertainty. The stakes were high, and the risks were palpable, Yet Nefertiti navigated these choppy waters with a deftness that speaks to her political acumen and understanding of human nature. So, as we leave her image behind, we must not forget that Nefertiti's legacy is not just one of beauty, but of power and influence. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of art and the timelessness of human ambition. It's a tale that continues to captivate us, not just because of its romance, but because of its stark reality. A reality that reminds us that behind every image, there is a story waiting to be told. And so, as we leave behind the sculpted visage of Nefertiti, we're left with the real-life plot twist that could give any mystery novel a run for its money. Her sudden disappearance from historical records. One minute she's the queen bee of ancient Egypt, and the next, she pulls a Houdini that would make even the most seasoned magician jealous. So, what gives? Where did Nefertiti go, and why did she vanish from the annals of history like yesterday's trending hashtag? The theories are as plentiful as cats in a pharaoh's palace, each one more tantalizing than the last. First up, we have the notion that Nefertiti was elevated to the status of co-regent, taking on the trappings of a pharaoh in her own right. This theory isn't just a flight of fancy. It's supported by some pretty compelling evidence. Inscriptions and images from the time hint at a mysterious figure named Nefertiti, who some scholars argue was none other than Nefertiti in disguise. It's like she donned a metaphorical cape, stepped into the spotlight, and ruled alongside her husband, or perhaps even after him. But hold on to your hieroglyphs, because another possibility suggests she was unceremoniously booted out of power. Yes, the ancient equivalent of a political exile, where one day you're in the lavish palace, and the next you're sent packing to the ancient Egyptian version of Siberia. This theory posits that Nefertiti fell out of favor, possibly due to political machinations or internal strife. Given the tumultuous climate of the time, with religious reforms and a city in the middle of nowhere to manage, it's not entirely implausible that palace intrigue might have turned against her. Then there's the more sobering idea that she simply met her demise, lost to the sands of time like so many before her. Her death could have been due to natural causes, an illness, or even foul play. After all, the ancient world wasn't exactly known for its sense of fair play. It's a theory that leaves us with more questions than answers, a reminder that history can be as elusive as a mirage on the desert horizon. Regardless of the reason for her disappearance, Nefertiti's vanishing act left a power vacuum that sent ripples through the Egyptian political landscape. The once stable court now resembled a soap opera, complete with backstabbing, shifting alliances, and more drama than a Shakespearean tragedy. Akhenaten's religious reforms, already on shaky ground, faced increased opposition without Nefertiti's steady hand to guide them. And let's not forget the economic implications of her absence. With Akhenaten still under construction and resources stretched thinner than papyrus, the kingdom's treasury was more precarious than ever. The labor force needed managing, taxes needed collecting, and the whole enterprise required an economic mastermind to keep the wheels turning. Nefertiti's disappearance only added to the chaos, leaving a leadership gap at a time when Egypt could least afford it. Enter the new players on the scene: Tutankhamun, the boy king, and the wizened courtier, who would later become pharaoh himself. Nefertiti's stepson, and possibly son-in-law, Tutankhamun, was thrust into power at a tender age, his reign overshadowed by the legacy of his predecessors. Meanwhile, was the political puppet master, pulling strings behind the scenes as Egypt struggled to regain its footing. The political instability of the time was palpable, akin to balancing on a pyramid's peak with a stiff wind blowing. The return to traditional polytheism was as much a practical decision as it was a theological one, aiming to appease the priestly class and restore a semblance of normalcy. Yet, the damage had been done, and the reverberations of Nefertiti's reign and subsequent disappearance will be felt for generations. As we sift through the sands of history, trying to piece together Nefertiti's fate, we're reminded of the impermanence of power and the fickle nature of legacy. Her story is a mosaic of ambition, beauty, and mystery, a testament to the complexities of the human condition. Whether she ended her days as a co-ruler, an outcast, or a victim of mortality, Nefertiti remains an enigma, a queen whose allure transcends time and whose legacy is as enigmatic as the smile on her famous bust. The intrigue surrounding her disappearance isn't just a footnote in history. It's a compelling chapter in the narrative of power and its pitfalls. It challenges us to consider the narratives we construct, the myths we perpetuate, and the realities we often overlook. In the end, Nefertiti's story reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, folly, and resilience. As we prepare to delve further into the aftermath of her reign, let us carry forward the questions that remain unanswered, the mysteries that continue to captivate us. Because in the world of ancient Egypt, where monuments rise and fall, where gods are born and forgotten, and where queens disappear without a trace, the only certainty is that history is never quite as it seems. As we sift through the sands of history, trying to piece together Nefertiti's fate, we're reminded of the impermanence of power and the fickle nature of legacy. Her story is a mosaic of ambition, beauty, and mystery, a testament to the complexities of the human condition. Whether she ended her days as a co-ruler, an outcast, or a victim of mortality, Nefertiti remains an enigma, a queen whose allure transcends time and whose legacy is as enigmatic as the smile on a famous bust. But let's not get swept away by the romanticism of a vanished queen without taking a closer look at what she left behind, the good, the bad, and the just plain baffling. What exactly is Nefertiti's legacy? First, let's address the ancient aftermath. Her reign coincided with one of the most turbulent periods in Egyptian history. Thanks to her and Akhenaten's radical religious reforms, which were about as popular as a sandstorm at a picnic. These reforms didn't just shake up spiritual practices, they challenged the very foundations of Egyptian society, leaving a legacy of confusion and chaos for successors to untangle. Akhenaten's dream of a monotheistic paradise crumbled almost as quickly as it rose. After his death, Egypt did a swift U-turn back to the old gods, as if the whole episode had been an awkward teenage phase they'd rather forget. This restoration of the old order, often called the Amarna interlude, was so thorough that Akhenaten and his sun-disk deity were essentially wiped from official records, an ancient version of delete history. It's a testament to how unpopular those changes were that even the Egyptians, who were usually all about preserving the past, decided to hit reset. Nefertiti's own role in this debacle is a matter of much debate. Was she a pivotal player in the religious upheaval, or was she simply swept along by her husband's fervor? The truth is likely both. She was a co-architect of the new religion, her image plastered alongside Akhenaten's on monuments and temples. But her disappearance from records suggests that her influence waned, possibly as the tide of opinion turned against their reforms. Fast forward a few thousand years, and Nefertiti's legacy has taken on a life of its own, fueled by the discovery of that stunning bust in 1912. With her elegantly elongated neck and serene smile, she's the poster queen for ancient Egyptian allure. It's like she's been cast as the leading lady in the ongoing soap opera of Egyptology, a character who embodies both the mystique and the glamour of a bygone era. But let's be real, this image is as much a construction as the pyramids themselves. Modern fascination with Nefertiti is a cocktail of myth, beauty, and mystery, shaken and served with a twist of historical intrigue. The romanticized version of her story often overlooks the more mundane realities of her life, the political machinations, the economic challenges, the sheer effort of maintaining power in a tumultuous period. In reality, she was more than just a pretty face, or bust, if you will. She was a queen navigating the treacherous waters of power with a deftness that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. The myth of Nefertiti has been perpetuated not just by her beauty, but by the tantalizing gaps in her story. It's a classic case of absence making the heart grow fonder, except in this case, it's the historical heart that beats faster at the mention of her name. The allure of the unknown is potent, and Nefertiti stands as a testament to the power of mystery in capturing the human imagination. However, the legend obscures the pragmatic realities of her reign. Leading a nation through religious and political upheaval is no small feat, and the economic implications of their grand projects were significant. The construction of Akhenaten, for instance, was an economic strain that would leave lasting scars on the kingdom's finances. The resources poured into this vanity project could have been used to bolster the empire's defenses or improve infrastructure. But history often shows us that leaders can be more focused on building legacies and cities in the desert. than ensuring the treasury isn't emptier than a pharaoh's promises. Yet, the romantic appeal of Nefertiti's story persists, a testament to our enduring fascination with powerful women who defy easy categorization. Her tale is a reminder that history is less about objective truths and more about the stories we choose to tell. In her case, it's a narrative that balances precariously between the idealized and the real, like a scale tipping under the weight of both truth and myth. In the end, Nefertiti's legacy is less about what she did and more about what we think she represents, a blend of power, beauty, and enigmatic allure that continues to captivate us. Her story, rife with unanswered questions and tantalizing possibilities, is a masterclass in historical intrigue. It serves as a reminder that the past is never as straightforward as it seems, and that the stories we tell often reveal more about us than about those who came before. Whether remembered as a queen, a co-ruler, or a cautionary tale of ambition, Nefertiti stands as both a historical figure and a modern muse. As we wrap up this historical journey, let's leave with a nod to the ongoing fascination with Nefertiti. Her story is a timeless reminder that history is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, enigma, and human nature. A tapestry that continues to unravel and reknit itself in the imaginations of those who seek to understand the past. So, here's to Nefertiti, the queen who vanished yet endures, her legacy as enduring as the sands of Egypt that both conceal and reveal the stories of antiquity. The sound of axes biting into wood echoes through the fjords of Scandinavia, a symphony of ambition and necessity. In the Viking Age, those relentless Norsemen weren't just content with raiding and trading. They were busy crafting what would become the apex predator of the sea, the Longship. Now, before you let visions of horned helmets and Thor's hammer dance through your head, let's set the record straight. The Viking Longship wasn't just a floating dragon with a penchant for glory. It was a technological leap forward that made Poseidon look like a guy with a kiddie pool. First things first, the early iterations of the Longship were less about pillaging monasteries and more about survival and sustenance. We're talking about the 8th century here, when your average Scandinavian farmer woke up, looked at the icy wasteland around him, and decided that going out to sea was a pretty good idea. The initial designs, known as carves and nars, were more akin to floating barns than the sleek war machines we romanticize today, built with a clinker technique, overlapping planks like a well-done shingle roof. These boats were sturdy enough to brave the North Sea, but also light enough to be carried over land. Yes, these folks were basically the original inventors of the crossover SUV, minus the cup holders and GPS. It's hard not to be impressed by the sheer ingenuity that went into these vessels. The Vikings used what's called the shell-first method, meaning the hull was constructed before the frame. This might sound like building a house starting with the roof, but it allowed for a flexible, lightweight structure that could twist with the waves, making it less likely to break apart. Talk about bending, not breaking. The average Longship was about 75 feet long and 17 feet wide, with a shallow draft of less than a meter, so it could navigate in both open seas and shallow rivers. Think of it as the Swiss Army knife of nautical engineering. Now, why did these Norsemen become so obsessed with shipbuilding? It all boils down to economics and survival. Farming in Scandinavia was about as fruitful as planting crops on the moon. So they looked to the sea for resources, trade, and let's be honest, some good old-fashioned looting. But to be successful, they needed a vessel that could hold its own against the elements and outrun any enemies or tax collectors they might encounter. This is where the Longship truly shines. It wasn't just a boat, it was a statement, a declaration of intent that said, "We're coming and we're bringing the thunder." And while those iconic dragon heads adorning the prow might seem like nothing more than a stylistic choice, they served a practical purpose, scaring the bejesus out of anyone unlucky enough to spot them on the horizon. Imagine seeing one of these bad boys barreling toward your coastal village. Suddenly, the idea of paying tribute doesn't seem so bad, does it? The Longship was a communal effort, too. Building one of these marvels wasn't a one-man job or a weekend hobby for Norse dads. Entire communities pitched in, from selecting the right oak trees, because nothing says sturdy like a tree that's been around since Odin was in diapers, to the skilled hands of shipwrights shaping the keel. It was a labor of love, and sometimes desperation, that required resources and manpower. These ships weren't cheap either. It's estimated that constructing a single longship in the Viking Age could cost the equivalent of a small fortune, involving hundreds of hours of labor and a dozen or so cows' worth of investment. But let's dig a bit deeper into the Viking wallet. Why spend all that effort and resources on a boat? Well, think of it as the ultimate return on investment. A single successful raid could yield riches that would make a modern hedge fund manager blush with envy. Gold, silver, slaves and goods flowed back to the Norse lands, fueling further adventures and cementing the Longship's place in history. And yet, despite these economic incentives, the Longship wasn't just a vehicle for violence. It was a bridge, literally and metaphorically, connecting isolated communities across vast distances. Trade routes opened up, bringing in goods and ideas from the wider world. The Vikings didn't just take, they also gave, spreading their cultural footprint across Europe in a way that would have made a social media influencer jealous. In a world where the average person rarely saw beyond their village, the Longship was a passport to adventure, a ticket to a wider world. It enabled the Norse to travel as far west as Newfoundland and as far east as Constantinople, mingling with cultures as diverse as the Celts, Arabs, and Byzantines. This blend of exploration and expansion was as much about curiosity and opportunity as it was about conquest. So, while it's tempting to romanticize the Longship as merely a tool of terror, it was also an emblem of human ingenuity, a testament to the Viking spirit of exploration and resilience. It's no wonder these ships have sailed into the annals of legend, leaving a wake that's felt even today. But remember, behind every legendary Longship was a community, a purpose, and a whole lot of Scandinavian grit. And so, while the Longship was indeed a vessel of exploration and connection, it was also a potent symbol of power and prestige. In a society where might often made right, the Longship was the ultimate status symbol, the Viking equivalent of a private jet with a dragon hood ornament. If you were a Norse chieftain or king, owning a fleet of these sleek sea serpents was your way of saying, "I've made it, and I'm not afraid to show it." But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This wasn't just about vanity. In the cutthroat world of Viking politics, where alliances shifted faster than the North Sea tides, a well-equipped Longship wasn't just a luxury. It was a necessity. You see, the political landscape of Scandinavia during the Viking Age was as fragmented as a shattered shield. We're talking about a land divided into numerous petty kingdoms and chiefdoms, each jostling for position and influence. Power was often measured by your ability to project it, and nothing projected power quite like a fleet of longships ready to set sail at a moment's notice. So why did these Norse power players pour their resources into constructing these magnificent maritime machines? Well, for one, it was about keeping up with the chances, literally. If your neighbor had a longship, you needed two, and if his ships had dragon heads, yours needed to spew metaphorical fire. It was a game of one-upmanship that would make any modern arms race look like a friendly spat over garden fences. But beyond the social flexing, there were very practical motivations, too. A longship was your ticket to expansion, both territorial and economic. With it, you could raid, trade, and establish footholds in foreign lands. It was your insurance policy against famine and your invitation to the world stage. And let's not forget the prestige factor on the homeland front. In Viking society, where oral tradition and reputation were everything, stories of your seafaring exploits spread faster than gossip at a medieval mead hall. If you wanted to be remembered, you needed a longship to write your legend on the waves. Now, let's dive a bit deeper into the economics of it all. Constructing a longship was no small task. These weren't your run-of-the-mill dinghies. They required vast amounts of wood, preferably oak, which was as prized as gold. You'd need upwards of 1,000 oaks for a single ship. That's a lot of trees and a lot of trips to the forest. Add to that the iron for nails, the wool for sails, and the manpower to bring it all together, and you've got a recipe for a significant investment. But here's the kicker. A longship could unlock vast economic potential. The ability to raid and trade across Europe meant access to a treasure trove of goods and resources. From the silver mines of Ireland to the silk markets of Byzantium, the world was your oyster, and the longship was your shucking knife. And while we're at it, let's bust a myth or two. While Vikings are often painted as bloodthirsty marauders, they were equally adept traders and negotiators. They didn't just take, they bought and sold, setting up trade networks that rivaled those of more civilized contemporaries. Politically, the Longship was the ultimate tool of diplomacy or coercion, depending on your perspective. Need to negotiate a marriage alliance. Arrive in style aboard your Longship, and you've set the stage for a favorable outcome. Want to put down a rebellious neighbor? A flotilla of Longships on the horizon had a way of convincing even the most stubborn chieftain to reconsider his position. It was all about leverage, and the Longship gave you plenty of it. In this Viking world, where power was as fluid as the seas they sailed, the Longship was the anchor of authority. It was as much about image as it was about utility. The dragon-prowed vessels became the calling cards of the Norse elite, and those who controlled them held the reins of power. But let's not romanticize it too much. The life of a Viking seafarer was anything but glamorous. Sure, the Longship looked impressive gliding across the waves, but life aboard was a different story. Crammed in tight quarters with your fellow warriors, exposed to the elements, and with no modern conveniences like, say, a toilet or a comfortable bed. The conditions were as harsh as the North Atlantic winds. Seasickness, storms, and scurvy were constant companions. It wasn't the luxurious seafaring life of a Mediterranean merchant, but rather a grueling test of endurance. Yet, despite these hardships, or perhaps because of them, the Longship and its crew formed a tight-knit community, bound by shared purpose and survival. It was this unity that allowed the Vikings to accomplish feats that seemed impossible to their contemporaries, like crossing the open Atlantic to reach the shores of North America centuries before Columbus. So, while the Longship might have been a symbol of power and status, it was also a testament to the resilience and resourcefulness of the Norse people. It was a vessel of dreams, ambitions, and sometimes desperation. In a world where nothing was guaranteed, the Longship provided a pathway to possibilities, for better or worse. And as we sail forward in this exploration, we'll see how these ships became more than just tools of conquest. They were the engines of a cultural and economic transformation that reshaped Europe and beyond. But for now, let's leave these seafaring warriors on the horizon, their dragon heads gleaming in the fading light, ready for whatever adventures awaited them next. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting the Longships in silhouette, it's time to dive into the gritty life of a Viking seafarer. Now, if you're picturing sun-soaked decks and leisurely voyages, prepare for a reality check. Life aboard a Longship was about as glamorous as a medieval mud bath. Imagine cramming into a 75-foot-long, 17-foot-wide wooden vessel with around 60 of your closest Norse companions. It's like a never-ending road trip with your extended family, minus the snacks and Spotify playlists. And by closest, I mean that literally. There was barely enough room to swing a battle axe, let alone a hammock. Let's start with the basics, sustenance. You might think the Vikings feasted on endless barrels of mead and roast boar, but the truth was less banquet and more bachelor pad. A typical meal consisted of hardtack, a biscuit so tough it could double as a weapon, and dried fish. Delicious, right? These hardy sailors also brought along barrels of salted meat and grain, but fresh food was a luxury, not a staple. The Norse knew how to stretch a meal, but even they couldn't make hardtack taste like haute cuisine. Water was another story. Fresh water on a month-long raid, not exactly easy to come by. Rainwater was collected when possible, but otherwise they relied on what they could store. Thirsty yet, this scarcity of fresh resources meant that stopping off at coastal villages wasn't just for pillaging. It was a pit stop to refill the pantry and water barrels. And yes, sometimes that meant raiding, other times meant trading. It all depended on how welcoming the locals were, or how intimidating the sight of a dragon-headed prow was on the horizon. But let's not forget the weather. The North Atlantic, where the seas are as unpredictable as a toddler on a sugar high. Viking sailors didn't have the luxury of modern meteorology or a friendly weather app. Storms could whip up faster than you could say, Ragnarok. And without a cabin to shelter in, the crew faced the elements head-on. So was the Norse god Thor waiting in the wings, ready to calm the seas with a flick of his wrist. Sadly, no. Turns out, praying to Thor didn't guarantee smooth sailing. Viking sailors had to rely on their own skills and resilience, which meant knowing when to beach the ship and wait out the storm. It wasn't divine intervention, it was survival instinct. Navigating these tumultuous waters was no small feat, either. Forget GPS. Their tools were the stars, the sun, and a healthy dose of intuition. When the skies were clear, they used a sun compass, a marvel of ingenuity that utilized the position of the sun to maintain course. Cloudy days. Well, let's just say a strong stomach for uncertainty was as crucial as a strong arm for rowing. Speaking of rowing, let's address the elephant, or should I say, the dragon, in the room. Ever wondered why Vikings had such impressive biceps? Rowing wasn't just a backup plan. It was the primary mode of propulsion when the wind wasn't playing nice. Those long, graceful sails were fantastic when the breeze was in your favor, but when it wasn't, it was time to break out the oars. With each man wielding a hefty oar, the crew rowed in unison to the beat of a drum, an ancient precursor to your local gym's spin class. But instead of burning calories, these rowers were burning with the need to reach their next destination, be it a trading port or the nearest village ripe for raiding. Now, you might think that this close-quarters camaraderie meant life aboard was all jolly shanties and Viking chants. But let's face it, spending weeks at sea with the same group of people was bound to test even the strongest friendships. Conflicts arose, and tempers flared. Yet, much like any good reality show, these tensions were often resolved, because ultimately, survival depended on cooperation. The Longship was the original team-building exercise, complete with trust falls into the sea. The Vikings weren't just seafarers, they were adventurers, pushing the boundaries of the known world. Their voyages took them across the North Atlantic to places like Iceland, Greenland, and even Newfoundland, centuries before Columbus set foot in the Americas. Leif Erikson, that intrepid Norse explorer, is credited with landing in North America around the year 1000. And while Vinland might sound like a vineyard getaway, it was actually a rugged, untamed land where survival was anything but guaranteed. These expeditions weren't just about claiming new lands. They were about trade and establishing connections. The Vikings set up outposts and traded goods like walrus ivory and furs, interacting with indigenous peoples along the way. It was a complex web of exploration, commerce, and cultural exchange, proof that the Vikings were as much about building bridges as they were about burning them. But myths die hard, don't they? The image of the hulking, horned Viking plundering his way through Europe is hard to shake. Yet the reality was often more nuanced. Sure, they were fearsome warriors, but they were also skilled navigators, traders, and settlers. The Longship wasn't just a vessel of war. It was a vehicle of opportunity, carrying the Norse across seas and into the annals of history. In the grand saga of the Viking Age, the Longship is both a protagonist and a plot device, driving the narrative forward. As we continue to explore the legacy of these legendary vessels, we'll uncover how they not only shaped the destiny of the Norse, but also left an indelible mark on the world. So, stay tuned. There are more adventures to come, with twists and turns worthy of the most gripping saga. As the Longship continues to slice through the seas of history, let's dive deeper into its global impact, beyond the borders of Scandinavia. It might surprise you to learn that these vessels weren't just tools of mayhem, but agents of cultural change, economic expansion, and even diplomacy. Sure, the Vikings liked a good raid as much as the next Norseman, but the Longships facilitated trade routes that would make Marco Polo jealous, and carried cultural exchanges that reshaped regions. First, let's tackle the trade aspect. Picture the Vikings not as marauding invaders, but as savvy merchants who could teach Wall Street a thing or two. Their longships weren't just about speed and intimidation. They were also the cargo trucks of their time. With a carrying capacity that could rival a small Amazon shipment, these ships ferried goods like furs, amber, and walrus ivory from the northern reaches to more temperate climes. In return, they brought back silver, silk, and spices, creating a web of trade that stretched from the icy waters of North America to the bustling markets of Byzantium. And here's where things get interesting. This wasn't just a one-way transfer of goods. Oh no, the Vikings were equal opportunity traders. They spread their own innovations too, like the aforementioned clinker-built technology. This method of overlapping planks not only made their ships lighter and faster, but also made waves across Europe, pun intended. Shipbuilders in the British Isles and beyond soon adopted similar techniques, proving that the Vikings' influence ran deeper than their swords. Now, let's talk numbers. By the late 8th century, when the Vikings first raided Lindisfarne in 793, they had already established trade routes as far afield as the Volga River. These weren't just casual trips. They were economic lifelines. The Vikings set up trading posts like Hedeby and Birka, which became bustling centers of commerce where goods and cultures mingled. At its peak, Hedeby was one of the largest towns in Scandinavia, with a population that could rival a small city today. Talk about punching above your weight class, but the Longship's impact wasn't confined to trade alone. These sleek vessels were also cultural ambassadors of a sort, even if unintentionally. As the Vikings traveled, they didn't just bring back loot, they absorbed and disseminated new ideas. From the Celts, they picked up artistic styles that would influence Norse designs, while encounters with the Islamic caliphates introduced them to advanced mathematics and astronomy. And let's not forget the linguistic legacy. Old Norse left its mark on languages across Europe, with words like berserk and saga still in use today. However, let's not over-romanticize this cultural exchange. While the Vikings were indeed traders and explorers, they were also opportunists. And sometimes that opportunity took the form of good old-fashioned pillaging. The infamous raids on monasteries, often viewed as cultural devastation, were actually economically motivated. Monasteries were rich in resources like gold and silver, easy pickings for a Viking raid team. But here's the kicker. These raids often stimulated local economies. Looted goods were sold back into the market, creating a cycle of wealth redistribution. It's a bit like a medieval stock market crash, with the Vikings as the original short sellers. Politically, the Longships were game changers. The ability to project power across the seas allowed the Norse to establish settlements far from home, from the Danelaw in England to the Kievan Rus in modern-day Russia. The latter was founded by the Varangians, a group of Swedish Vikings, and became a nexus of Slavic and Norse culture. This fusion wasn't just a footnote in history. It laid the groundwork for the Russian state. Imagine a Viking setting up shop and inadvertently becoming a founding father of a nation. Talk about an unexpected legacy. The Longship's role as a diplomatic tool shouldn't be underestimated either. The Vikings weren't just brutes, they were shrewd negotiators. Consider their relations with the Byzantine Empire, where they served as the Varangian Guard. These elite Viking warriors were so valued for their loyalty and fighting prowess that they became the personal bodyguards of the Byzantine emperors. It's a bit like hiring your fiercest competitor as your security detail. Risky, but if you can't beat them, might as well hire them. Economically, the Longship's impact rippled across Europe. By opening new trade routes and establishing far-flung settlements, the Vikings injected vitality into stagnant economies. They were the original catalysts of globalization, bringing diverse worlds into contact and leaving an indelible mark on medieval Europe. This wasn't just about acquiring wealth, it was about spreading influence. When you think of the Viking Age, picture not just the violence, but the vibrant exchange of ideas, technology, and bloodlines. Yet, for all their influence, the Vikings' dominance was not unlimited. The same seas that empowered them also set boundaries. The Longship was formidable, but not invincible. Its shallow draft was perfect for rivers, but less ideal for prolonged ocean voyages, limiting the extent of their reach. And as European kingdoms grew stronger and more organized, the Viking raids lost their edge. By the 11th century, the era of Viking expansion was winding down, but their legacy was far from over. In this interconnected world they helped create, the seeds of modern Europe were sown. The Vikings may have sailed off into the mists of time, but their longships left a wake that we can still trace today. From trade innovations to cultural exchanges, the impact of these vessels reverberated long after the last dragon prow had vanished over the horizon. But let's not drop anchor just yet. There's more to the Viking story, and as we continue our journey, we'll uncover the lasting effects of their maritime adventures. Next up, we'll delve into how the Longship's legacy influenced future generations of seafarers, and how the echoes of the Viking Age can still be heard in the corridors of power and commerce. So keep your sea legs steady and your eyes on the horizon. Our voyage is far from over. So, where did that leave the Longship as the world sailed into the medieval sunset? Well, much like the fate of the fax machine, the Longship's dominance was destined to be outpaced by changing tides, both literally and figuratively. By the 12th century, the game was changing faster than a Viking with a sudden change of heart about settling down. First off, let's talk tech. The Longship was a marvel of engineering for its time, But like any groundbreaking innovation, it was only a matter of time before something newer and shinier rolled off the medieval assembly line. Enter the Carg, a type of ship that was as barksy and unsexy as its name suggests, but packed a punch in terms of cargo capacity. Unlike the Longship's svelte, shallow design, the Carg boasted a deeper hull, which meant it could carry more goods on each voyage. This was a big deal for burgeoning trade networks that were less interested in speed and more about moving mountains of merchandise. The Carg wasn't just about heft, though. It also had a little something called a stern rudder. Now, if you're rolling your eyes at the mention of rudders, bear with me. This seemingly small innovation was like upgrading from a bicycle to a sports car. With the stern rudder, ships could now be steered with far greater precision, making them more adaptable and reliable than the traditional side rudder used on longships. Who knew a hunk of wood at the back of a boat could hold such sway? Meanwhile, back on land, political climates were shifting like an indecisive Norse guard. The once disjointed kingdoms of Europe were consolidating into centralized states with stronger defenses and more organized military forces. Remember those flimsy coastal defenses the Vikings loved to trample over? By the 11th century, those were being replaced by fortified castles and well-trained armies that weren't so easily intimidated by a wooden dragon head. The Vikings' preferred method of surprise attacks was quickly becoming a relic of the past, much like their penchant for wearing animal skins as fashion statements. And let's not forget the impact of the Crusades. Yes, those grand medieval road trips to the Holy Land. While the Vikings were busy with their raids, the rest of Europe was getting a crash course in military tactics and maritime technology through encounters in the Mediterranean. This cross-pollination of ideas meant that when the Norse looked south, they saw not just new trade partners, but also potential competitors who were now armed with improved ship designs and battle strategies. It's the classic case of teaching your neighbor how to fish, only to have them outfish you the next season. Economically, the tides were turning against the Longship as well. The rise of urban centers and the expansion of trade networks meant that commerce was increasingly conducted through established routes and ports that favored larger, more capacious vessels like the Carg. The Longship, with its limited cargo space and focus on speed, simply couldn't keep up with the demands of a growing market economy. It was like trying to run a modern shipping empire with a fleet of sports cars. Fast, sure, but not exactly practical for bulk transport. The political landscape of Scandinavia itself was also evolving. The Norsemen were settling down, literally and figuratively. The age of exploration and expansion gave way to an era of consolidation and kingdom building. The once feared Viking raiders were now more interested in cultivating their lands and securing their borders than in plundering distant shores. With Christianity spreading through the Norse world like wildfire, the cultural and religious shifts further dampened the old seafaring spirit. After all, it's hard to justify raiding when your new priest keeps reminding you that pillaging doesn't exactly win you points in the afterlife. But as the Longship sailed into the annals of history, its legacy was far from forgotten. Fast forward to today, and these vessels still hold a place in our collective imagination, thanks to pop culture's enduring fascination with all things Viking. From Hollywood blockbusters to TV series that take creative liberties with history. Yes, I'm looking at you. Vikings. These formidable ships continue to capture our imaginations. And let's be honest, who can resist a good Viking battle scene, complete with roaring warriors and sleek ships slicing through the waves? Yet, the Longship's influence isn't confined to the realm of entertainment. Modern maritime technology owes a nod to these wooden wonders. The concept of clinker-built construction, with its overlapping planks, has found its way into contemporary boat-building techniques. Even the notion of lightweight, flexible structures that can withstand the unpredictable nature of the sea is a testament to the Vikings' maritime genius. In a world where adaptability and resilience are prized, the Longship's design principles still resonate. And so, as we chart a course through history, the tale of the Viking Longship remains a poignant reminder of human ingenuity and the relentless quest for discovery. It was a vessel that conquered oceans, connected cultures, and left an indelible mark on the world. It was both a symbol of power and a tool of survival, a testament to the Norse spirit that dared to venture into the unknown. In the end, the Longship's journey mirrors our own, a voyage of exploration, adaptation, and transformation. While the dragons may have faded from the prow, their spirit lives on, carried by the winds of change and the waves of innovation. As we sail into the future, the legacy of the Viking Longship continues to inspire, reminding us that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single step, or in this case, a single stroke of an oar. So, as we drop anchor on this chapter of history, let's raise a toast to the Longship, a vessel that journeyed far beyond its time, leaving a wake that stretches across centuries. Here's to the Norsemen who dared to dream, and the ships that carried those dreams to distant shores. May their legacy sail on, as enduring as the seas they once conquered. In the world of 19th century Britain, you found yourself caught in the tangled web of the Victorian workhouse system. It all kicked off with the 1834 Poor Law Amendment Act, a name that rolls off the tongue like a lead balloon. The government, in its infinite wisdom, decided the best way to aid the impoverished was to make poverty as unpleasant as possible. The idea was simple. If being poor wasn't already enough of a headache, they'd make sure asking for help felt like pulling teeth without anesthesia. You see, the economic pressures of the time were no joke. The Industrial Revolution was shaking things up, and people were flocking to cities faster than you could say urban sprawl. But with factories replacing farms and machinery outpacing manpower, there was a surplus of workers and a dearth of jobs. The powers that be figured, if they made the workhouses sufficiently dreadful, only the truly desperate would seek refuge there. Elegant solution, right? Make life so miserable that you'd rather die in the gutter than darken their doorsteps. To add a sprinkle of moral superiority, they painted poverty as a personal failing. You must have done something to deserve this, was the prevailing attitude. It was the ultimate blame game. If you were poor, it wasn't because the economy was tanking or jobs were scarce. No, it was because you'd somehow failed as a human being. This mindset seeped into the very walls of the workhouses, where the daily grind was designed to remind you of your supposed shortcomings. Let's talk nitty-gritty. When they said the workhouse was a last resort, they meant it. Meals for less than a penny. Check. Gruel that made Oliver Twist's porridge look like a Michelin-starred delight. Double check. The whole operation ran on the cheap, aiming to spend as little on the inmates as humanly possible. If there was a way to squeeze a penny, the workhouse would do it, and then some. And while we're on the subject of pennies, the bureaucrats behind the Poor Law Amendment Act weren't exactly penny pinchers when it came to their own comforts. The commissioners of the poor law had a cushy gig, ensuring their own livelihoods while tightening the noose around the necks of the impoverished. It was a classic case of rules for thee, but not for me. But let's not get too swept away by the allure of Victorian melodrama. The workhouses, grim as they weren't some Dickensian caricature. They were real places filled with real people, each carrying a story that was often far more complex than the moralistic narrative suggested. Sure, there were the idle poor, but there were also the sick, the elderly, widows, and orphans, people caught up in a social safety net that was more net than safety. Ever heard the phrase, less eligibility? It's a corker. It was the guiding principle of the workhouse system, meaning conditions inside had to be worse than the worst conditions outside. It was a deterrent policy on steroids, ensuring that the workhouse was a place you only went when every other option had evaporated like morning mist. The idea was to make them so unappealing that even the rats would think twice before moving in. The whole system was a study in contrast. On one hand, it was about efficiency and economy. On the other, it was a morality play, a harsh lesson in the supposed virtues of self-reliance and the consequences of moral failure. The workhouses stood as stark monuments to this duality, casting long shadows over the social landscape of Victorian England. So, as you find yourself in this era of stiff upper lips and starched collars, remember that life inside the workhouse wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a battle against a system that was rigged from the start, a system that saw poverty as a crime and the poor as its rightful prisoners. And that, my friend, is the grim reality of the Victorian workhouse, a place where the cost of a meal was measured not just in pennies, but in dignity and despair. So, as you find yourself in this era of stiff upper lips and starched collars, life inside the workhouse wasn't just a matter of survival. It was a battle against a system rigged from the start, a system that saw poverty as a crime and the poor as its rightful prisoners. Now, let's dive deeper into the daily grind within those cheerless walls. Wake up, sunshine. It's 5:00 a.m., and the day in a Victorian workhouse begins with the kind of rude awakening that would make a modern alarm clock sound like a lullaby. The schedule was as regimented as a military boot camp, minus the sense of camaraderie or purpose. And if you thought mornings couldn't get any worse, try waking up to the prospect of a breakfast that makes cardboard look appetizing. The infamous workhouse diet. If you're envisioning a scene straight out of Oliver Twist, you're not too far off. Breakfast often consisted of watery gruel, a concoction that was about as appealing as it sounds. Imagine a bowl so thin you could practically see your reflection. It wasn't meant to nourish. It was meant to remind you of your place, to keep you hungry enough to remain compliant, but alive enough to keep working. Lunch might feature the culinary delight of stale bread, paired with a soup that was more water than anything else. Dinner was much the same, with perhaps a small piece of cheese thrown in as a treat, if you were lucky. If the goal was to make a meal feel like an act of penance, mission accomplished. Now, let's talk about the labor. Workhouse residents were put to tasks that could rival the labors of Hercules, except without the glory or divine rewards. Stone breaking, oakum picking, unraveling old rope fibers, and bone crushing were just a few of the charming activities on the menu. Designed to be unpleasant and monotonous, these tasks were the Victorian equivalent of busywork, ensuring that your mind would have nowhere to wander except toward thoughts of escape or despair. It was a daily grind that ground down more than just stones. It eroded human dignity, too. And here's where the plot thickens, or thins, depending on how you look at it. The workhouses weren't just about keeping bodies busy. They were about keeping them separated, too. Men, women, and children lived distinctly separate lives, divided not just by walls, but by the notion that mixing could lead to all sorts of trouble. They claimed it was about propriety. But let's be real. It was about control. Separate the populations, and you dilute any potential for rebellion or solidarity. It was crowd control on a grand scale, wrapped up in a veneer of moral decency. The living quarters were grim, to put it mildly. Dormitories were crowded, with rows of narrow beds lined up like soldiers on parade, each one offering about as much comfort as a sack of potatoes. Privacy was a luxury no one could afford, and personal belongings were reduced to whatever could be carried in one's pockets, if there were pockets to be had. For children, the workhouse was both a school and a prison. Education was a mixed bag, with some workhouses offering rudimentary lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic, while others saw it as a waste of time and resources better spent on labor. After all, why educate the poor when you can put them to work? It was a short-sighted policy that ensured the cycle of poverty continued, generation after generation. The gender divide extended to the labor assignments as well. Men were often put to physically demanding tasks like chopping wood or breaking stones, while women were relegated to domestic chores, laundry, sewing, and cooking. It was a reflection of the broader societal norms that saw women as caretakers and men as breadwinners, even in a setting where neither was truly possible. You might wonder about the appeal of such a system, if appeal is even the right word. The workhouse was a solution, albeit a twisted one, to the economic pressures of the time. With cities swelling from rural migration and jobs scarce, the workhouse offered a grim alternative, a place to go when all else failed. It was a safety net woven from barbed wire, designed to catch you before you fell too far, but sharp enough to make you wish you hadn't. The workhouse was a paradox, a place of refuge that felt more like a sentence. It stood as a testament to the Victorian belief in self-reliance, a belief that was more about moral posturing than practical support. If you were there, it was because you hadn't tried hard enough, or so the narrative went. It was a sentiment that echoed through the halls, a constant reminder that help came with strings attached, strings that could easily become chains. In this microcosm of Victorian society, the workhouse was the ultimate equalizer, a place where individual stories were subsumed by the collective struggle. It was a lesson in humility, a daily reminder that poverty was a condition to be endured, not alleviated. And yet, despite the grim realities, the workhouse was not without its myths and romantic notions. Tales of redemption and resilience, of individuals rising above their circumstances, lent a sheen of hope to an otherwise bleak institution. But make no mistake, these were exceptions, not the rule. As we pause here in our exploration of the Victorian workhouse, remember that this was a system as layered as a Dickens novel, with characters just as complex and stories just as compelling. It's a chapter in history that continues to resonate, a reminder of the lengths to which society will go to manage its most vulnerable. And as we continue our journey through this era, keep in mind that the workhouse was more than just a building. It was a reflection of the values and fears of its time, a mirror held up to the face of Victorian England. Now, let's shift the spotlight from the weary souls within the workhouse to the tough cookies at the helm, the masters and mistresses. These folks weren't exactly living in the lap of luxury themselves, but they sure had the power to make life a bit more, shall we say, memorable for the inmates. Imagine being the ringmaster of a circus where the performers never wanted to join, and you've got the gist. Our workhouse commanders were tasked with running a tight ship, often with budgets tighter than their starched collars. They were the ones enforcing the ironclad rules laid down by the poor law guardians. Their salary, oh, a princely sum that might just cover a decent pair of boots and a few pints at the local pub. We're talking around £50 to £100 a year in the mid-1800, which was a step up from the workhouse, but hardly enough to see you sipping champagne. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone sign up for such a gig? Well, for some, it was a step up the social ladder. Even a shaky rung beats hanging at the bottom. Others might have been motivated by a sense of duty or, brace yourself, compassion. But let's not get too carried away with notions of benevolence. For many, it was simply about having a roof over their heads and 3 square meals a day, or at least 3 more edible than the inmates. The discipline they enforced was less about keeping order and more about maintaining control. Rules were as strict as a Victorian schoolmarm's glare, and the punishments, oh, they were creative. A favourite was the refractory ward, a special little corner of the workhouse where troublemakers could contemplate their sins in isolation. Whether it was for talking back, shirking work, or smuggling extra gruel, stepping out of line meant stepping into a world of hurt. But hey, let's give credit where credit's due. The masters and mistresses had to juggle a chaotic mix of bureaucracy, human misery, and industrial-era logistics. It was no small feat keeping the wheels turning in these institutions that were equal parts factory and prison. And let's not forget the delightful task of dealing with the Board of Guardians, who were always on the lookout for ways to cut costs further. Think of them as the ultimate penny pinchers, always ready to swap the workhouse's butter for margarine, if margarine weren't a luxury, of course. Speaking of luxuries, let's talk casual wards. These were the places where itinerant workers could rest their weary heads for a night or two. Picture a dingy no-tell motel without the mint on the pillow. Casual wards were often more dreaded than the workhouse itself. Why? Because even here, the conditions were rougher than a badger's backside. It was a place of last resort, a pit stop on the highway to nowhere. Itinerant workers, the so-called tramps, would roll in seeking shelter from the storm. Literally, in many cases, what they found was a bare-bones setup that made camping under a bridge seem cozy. A night in the casual ward came with its own set of strings attached. Work the next day in exchange for your stay. And if you thought the regular workhouse diet was dismal, the casual ward fare was practically a hunger strike. But let's bust a myth or two. The homeless weren't necessarily lazy drifters looking for a free ride. Many were casualties of the Industrial Revolution's relentless march, shuffled from job to job like pawns on an industrial chessboard. The casual wards were a symptom of a society struggling to cope with its economic growing pains, where the social safety net was more of a tripwire. Now, imagine the scene. Men and women huddled in separate rooms, each with nary a blanket or a friendly face. The air thick with the scent of desperation and unwashed bodies. The casual ward was a place that could break spirits faster than you could say workhouse blues. For many, it was a choice between this or sleeping rough. And while neither option was appealing, at least the casual ward offered a roof, albeit one that leaked like a sieve on rainy nights. Despite the grim realities, the system somehow kept chugging along, a testament to the Victorian knack for endurance. It was a world where survival was the name of the game, and everyone played by rules that seemed designed to ensure nobody won. And yet, even in this bleak landscape, stories of resilience and defiance flickered like candles in the dark. People found ways to carve out moments of humanity, even if it meant skirting the edges of the rules. So, as we continue to unravel the tangled threads of the Victorian workhouse. Keep in mind that history is as much about people as it is about policies. Behind every rule and regulation, there were real lives being lived, real struggles being fought. The masters and mistresses, the inmates, the itinerants, all played their parts in this grand, grim theatre of poverty and power. In our next chapter, we'll delve deeper into the world of the workhouse inmates, exploring the barns they forged and the small rebellions that kept their spirits alive. But for now, let's leave the masters to their ledgers and the casual wards to their restless inhabitants, knowing we've only just begun to scratch the surface of this complex and compelling story. So here we stand, on the brink of debunking the myths and media stereotypes that have clung to Victorian workhouses like the London fog. Let's not mince words. Charles Dickens had a flair for the dramatic, and his portrayal of these institutions in Oliver Twist is as iconic as it is exaggerated. Who can forget the image of little Oliver, eyes wide as saucers, asking for more? It's a scene that's been etched into the collective imagination like a tattoo on the societal psyche. But how accurate was it? Dickens wasn't pulling these stories out of thin air. He had a bone to pick with the poor law system, which he saw as a dark stain on the nation's conscience. Yet, while his critique was razor-sharp, his representation of workhouses as the ultimate halls of horror is a tad theatrical. Yes, conditions were grim, no one's denying that, but the reality was a complex tapestry of bureaucracy and necessity, not just a Dickensian nightmare. The workhouse, for all its flaws, was an institution born from economic pressures and societal shifts. The Industrial Revolution was a steamroller, and many were caught under its wheels. Jobs vanished like morning dew, and the rural poor migrated to cities, hoping to catch a break. The workhouse was a grim safety net for those who found nothing but closed doors. Yet they weren't all about cold gruel and oppression. Some were relatively progressive, experimenting with reforms like education and basic health care, albeit on a shoestring budget that would make your average DIY enthusiast weep. Now, let's talk about the art of storytelling. Victorian literature wasn't just about telling it like it was. It was about crafting narratives that resonated with the public. The image of the workhouse as a pit of despair served a purpose. It galvanized public opinion and, over time, drove reforms. Dickens' vivid tales weren't just stories. They were calls to action, rallying cries for change in a society that often preferred to look the other way. But here's the kicker. These narratives also contributed to enduring myths. The idea of the workhouse as a one-size-fits-all horror show overshadowed the nuanced reality. Sure, some were run by tyrants who would have made Ebenezer Scrooge look like a philanthropist. Yet others were managed by people genuinely trying to do their best within a flawed system. The broad brush of fiction painted over these details, leaving us with a skewed view that lingers even today. Fast forward to our modern era, and the workhouse mythos persists. We've got pop culture to thank for that. Movies, TV shows, and novels still love to dip into this well of Victorian melodrama. It's easy to see why. Tales of endurance and suffering make for gripping narratives, but in doing so, they often gloss over the complexities that made workhouses more than just dens of Dickensian despair. Consider this. The idea of poverty as a moral failing hasn't entirely disappeared. It's mutated, sure, but echoes of it still reverberate in contemporary discussions about welfare and social support. The notion that help should come with a side of shame is a relic from the Victorian mindset that refuses to die. And while we're not exactly sending people to break stones in exchange for a bed anymore, the stigma of seeking assistance remains a barrier for many. So why do these myths endure? Simple. They're comforting, in a twisted sort of way. They allow us to compartmentalize poverty as something distant, something that happens to others. By clinging to these narratives, we absolve ourselves of the responsibility to look deeper, to question the structures that perpetuate inequality. It's easier to believe in the myth of the lazy pauper than to acknowledge the systemic issues that keep people trapped in cycles of poverty. Yet, history is a relentless teacher, and the lessons of the workhouse era are more relevant than ever. They remind us that poverty is not a crime, and that charity without empathy is a hollow gesture. Dickens may have exaggerated for effect, but his underlying message remains potent. Society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable, and the scales of justice are often tipped against them. As we continue to peel back the layers of the Workhouse story, remember that every narrative has two sides, the legend and the reality. The challenge is to see beyond the myth, to confront the uncomfortable truths that lie beneath, and to strive for a future where history doesn't repeat itself. Because if there's one thing the Victorian Workhouse has taught us, it's that the past is never truly past. It's a mirror held up to our present, reflecting our values and fears in stark relief. Stay tuned, because in our next chapter, we'll delve into the lives of the Workhouse's youngest and most vulnerable inmates, the children. We'll explore how they navigated a system stacked against them, and how their stories challenge the myths we've come to accept. Until then, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the truth is often stranger than fiction, and history is never as simple as it seems. As we pivot from the youngest inmates and their uphill battles, let's dive into the twilight of the Workhouse system, a tale as packed with drama and intrigue as any Victorian novel. By the early 20th century, the winds of change were howling through the dreary corridors of these institutions, rattling the very foundations of the poor law system. The social and economic landscapes were shifting, and the Workhouse, once seen as the catch-all solution for society's woes, was becoming an anachronism. You see, the 20th century rolled in with a bang, war, economic upheaval, and social reform all jostling for the spotlight. The First World War, that colossal clash of empires, had a peculiar side effect. It spotlighted the gaping holes in the social safety net. Soldiers returned home to find the same old problems waiting for them: unemployment, poverty, and you guessed it, the Workhouse. But the world had changed, and people were no longer content to accept the status quo. One of the big guns in this saga of change was the Liberal government, who, in a rare moment of political clarity, realized that the poor law was as outdated as a monocle at a jazz concert. The 1909 Minority Report of the Royal Commission on the Poor Laws and Relief of Distress was a pivotal document, calling for the abolition of the Workhouse system and proposing a more humane approach to welfare. It was a report that dared to suggest that poverty might not be a moral failing, but a social issue that required collective responsibility. Shocking, I know. The push for reform was also fueled by the rise of the labor movement and the burgeoning influence of trade unions. These groups weren't interested in tepid half-measures. They wanted real change, a complete overhaul of a system that treated the poor as criminals rather than citizens deserving of support. The idea was to replace the patchwork quilt of workhouses with more specialized institutions: hospitals for the sick, schools for the young, and housing for those who needed it. In 1913, a flicker of this new approach emerged with the establishment of the Public Assistance Committees through the Liberal government's reforms. While not a complete dismantling of the Workhouse system, it was a step towards a more nuanced understanding of poverty relief. These committees were tasked with providing aid in a more dignified manner, a sharp departure from the punitive ethos of the workhouses. But let's pause for a moment and pour one out for the Workhouse's most infamous legacy, the bureaucratic nightmare that was the Poor Law Guardians. These stalwart defenders of fiscal restraint had long overseen the Workhouse system, ensuring that every penny was pinched until it squealed. By 1930, however, they'd been given their marching orders, replaced by local councils who, at least in theory, were more attuned to the needs of their communities. The final nail in the Workhouse coffin came with the Local Government Act of 1929, which effectively dismantled the poor law system. This landmark legislation transferred responsibility for poor relief to local authorities, ushering in an era of social services that aimed to be more compassionate and comprehensive. It's worth noting that this wasn't just about dismantling an archaic system. It was a recognition that society had a duty to protect its most vulnerable members, not punish them for their misfortune. As the workhouses shuttered their doors, what replaced them was a welfare state in its infancy, a system that promised to support rather than stigmatize. The National Health Service, launched in 1948, was a cornerstone of this new approach, offering healthcare free at the point of use, a far cry from the grim infirmaries of the workhouse. Meanwhile, state pensions and unemployment benefits began to weave a safety net designed to catch those who might otherwise fall through the cracks. Yet, for all the progress, the shadow of the workhouse loomed large over these new institutions. The stigma attached to seeking help was a stubborn ghost, lingering like the last guest at a party. Even today, echoes of this Victorian mindset can be heard in debates about welfare and social support. The narrative of the undeserving poor is a persistent whisper in the background of policy discussions, a reminder that old habits die hard. So, what do we make of this convoluted history? The workhouse system, with its Dickensian flair and real-world horrors, was a product of its time, a time when the answer to poverty was more about deterrence than support. But as we've seen, the story didn't end there. The decline and eventual abolition of the workhouses were driven by a growing awareness that society could, and should, do better. Today, as we navigate the complexities of modern welfare systems, the lessons of the workhouse era are as relevant as ever. They remind us that poverty is not a personal failing, but often a societal one, and that the way we treat our most vulnerable is a reflection of our values. Sure, we've come a long way from the days of gruel and stone breaking, but the conversation about how best to support those in need is far from over. As we wrap up this journey through the dimly lit halls of the Victorian workhouse, remember that history is not just a collection of dates and events. It's a mirror reflecting our past choices and a guide for future ones. The workhouse may be a relic of the past, but its legacy lives on, challenging us to think critically about how we address poverty today. After all, the past is not just a foreign country, it's the foundation upon which we build our future. So, let's keep asking questions, keep challenging assumptions, and most importantly, keep striving for a society that offers everyone a chance, not just the barest survival, but the dignity of a life well lived.